From the boomer originally being a loud mental asylum patient to Lewis being a hate-filled religious man, a lot has changed from concept to reality in the scope of the first Left 4 Dead. The Left 4 Dead series is one of very brief and scattered existence from its release in 2008, its full integration into Left 4 Dead 2 content-wise by 2011, to its final official update in 2013, and the fan-made, Valve-backed Last Stand update in 2020, with just 2 DLCs and a comic addressing the crossover of both groups of survivors and what possibly happened to the OG survivors. Beyond that, it's been pretty much community-driven content that has kept the game's numbers bolstered, alongside solid gameplay, timeless characters, and concrete replayability, becoming a staple in the horde and zombie genres, as well as influencing many games of the last decade and a half. But how different could things have been if designs and ideas never changed from their concept phase? What were some of the ground floor ideas for the infected, the survivors, and even the story, world, and green flu virus itself? Well, we are exploring everything about the first installment today as we get into it. This is the original plans for Left 4 Dead 1. I was going to make this video on both Left 4 Dead 1 and Left 4 Dead 2 changes from conception, but if this video performs well enough, we will do a dive into the developments of Left 4 Dead 2. So turn off restricted mode, subscribe, like, and all that jazz. But it's pretty well known how different the original cast of survivors from Left 4 Dead 1 were from their final designs. Originally shown on the first trailer for the series within the Orange Box collection and subsequent trailers thereafter, having them all look like they were ready for the zombie apocalypse to even doomsday prepper levels, most strapped from head to toe in thick clothing, bandoliers, and rough exteriors, looking less like they were randomly thrust together as a group of survivors when the green flu pandemic suddenly swept the northeastern United States, and more like 4 badasses that were put together because they were designed to be together to quarrel and or bang. But what was so different about our 4 OG survivors in mind, body, and soul though? Having seen the least amount of change is our veteran guy, Bill Overbeck, wearing much thicker military garbs than his final counterpart, not really fitting the narrative of him slaying his way out of Mercy Hospital to get back home and rush to put on his army attire. Again, more like he was prepared and had the time to fully stock up for his second military campaign. His facial hair is also much more bushy and unkempt, his appearance more in line with his feature in Dead by Daylight. He is still the leader of the bunch, and you know him well, using his army expertise to guide his group of survivors. However, originally he had an additional character trait where he was increasingly paranoid of the virus, fearing that any one of his group could turn at any moment due to the unpredictable nature of this particular disease, but promoting fear and dissent in dialogue between your characters in a game centered around teamwork didn't really fit where Valve wanted to take the game. Ironically, this cut form of Bill would see this trait carried over into the church guy's paranoia of the group after he was bit. This change is most apparent when the very first thing we ever see in the franchise is Bill sticking his hands in the bisected corpse of a dead boomer and messing with its bile, smearing it on Francis right after, mentally unaffected by the biohazard he just fingered.
Are you ready?
Zoey was the next in line to receive some changes, looking more like an older version of her final self, but sharper around the edges, more sunken in eyes and red under her eyelids to seem more disheveled, donning more firearms-related apparel as if she was less a film nut college girl and more of a military man's daughter trained to be a zombie killing machine. During the initial Counter-Strike, or what they called Terror Strike zombie mod days, she was also not settled on her iconic pink hoodie, having different colors to attempt to make her more identifiable in the horde-driven environment. Former box arts also showed her with long hair and a red/pink bandana, almost like she was a hippie, possibly to have more of her pink thematic coloring be easily discernible in the hectic gameplay. From the time of conception, she had a completely different voice actress from that of who we knew as Jen Helen Taylor. She was originally voiced by Alicia Guidewell, the voice and face actress behind Portal Shell, Star Fox's Crystal, and even the Smash Brothers version of Zero Suit Samus. Looks like Zoey has always been destined to be voiced by female badasses in borderline space horror shooters. This original voice of hers can still be heard very scantily when calling for help from rescue vehicles.
Okay guys, help's on the way!
This way.
Sounding older and more charismatically pompous and more confident. Kind of not even resembling the horror movie fanatic young woman that would transform mentally over the events of the games and comic, where she would become this girl by the end of the sacrifice once Bill had died after imparting the lessons of survival on her. Zoey can also be seen as the largest driving factor in character design philosophy based on how the group's dynamic would have originally been. Instead of slight bickering and dialogue to move the characters forward, some interactions would have seen them either straight up hating each other or wanting to bang each other. In Zoey and Francis's case, the latter would have been true for them, having them romantically involved with each other with dialogue to accentuate that. However, during beta testing, Valve devs like Chet Falasek stated that the lines were too distracting for players in the fast-paced point A to point B flow of the game. Instead, she would end up just viewing Francis as a pessimistic idiot kind of uncle.
This is not going well.
Francis, on that note, takes us into completely different Survivor-looking territory, resembling more so the design of the Midnight Riders drummer Ox, more portly in the stomach region with a rounder, less sharper face and a more holly-jolly nose. Also looking less clean, more unkempt, with an unbuckled belt and greasy, long hair and poofier facial hair, looking more cliche and akin to his biker backstory than what we got in the final result, wherein even his vest and arm tattoo had the Hell's Legion logo plastered on to drive home that fact. His tattoos and clothing generally remain the same in the final product, which makes the twin brother dynamic between the first and last design of Francis in the White Life fan series much more entertaining. In terms of his voice, the actor Vince Valenzuela was never changed.
Fat guys over 50, they love me.
He stayed consistent throughout, but they did have to put the pitch of his voice to a lower level.
And it's kind of funny. You know, I hate everything. I hate lawyers. When are they get done practicing law?
As the development team was told that he originally sounded a bit too much like Mad TV's own actor Artie Lang.
All right, on that one I was wasted. So if you're a kid out there and you're considering doing drugs, don't do them for the wrong reasons, just to be cool. Do them because you hate yourself.
So yeah, they had to pitch him down. His height was also toned down, as he was originally towering over other survivors at a tall 6'5", or 195 centimeters or 77 inches for non-US peeps. This was most likely done to make him stand at equal height as other survivors for instant recognizability's sake and consistency of playing different survivors. That way your camera perspective does not change between playthroughs, but also to not mistake him in a quick encounter for a smoker that usually stands a shade taller. At some points, it was shown on scrapped box arts that he would have also donned a mohawk as well, but instead Turtle Rock and Valve decided to shave him all the way down on his scalp down to his Lambda logo. No hair for our hate-filled biker bro. His infatuation with Zoey was also scrapped.
So you're interested?
Ugh, not if you were the last man on Earth.
I could arrange that.
What do you mean by that?
All right! Yeah.
So this may be a reason his largest character trait is hating everything. The dude was just pissed at Valve for taking away a lot. On the note of hating things and others, Lewis is most definitely the most altered survivor in the OG crew, looking nothing like his finalized design, looking more like the governor from The Walking Dead's bodyguard named, his name was Shumpert? Okay, yeah, the governor's bodyguard named Shumpert. Having experienced the same fate as Beta Francis, he originally had way more hair. This time, Lewis had black curly locks atop his cranium. The dude also looks nothing like his original backstory. The Lewis that we know today was an IT tech that experienced the zombie outbreak from his place of work. His finalized design that we do know reflected that to be a veritable homage to Shaun from Shaun of the Dead, which is ironic considering his original background saw him as the manager of an electronics store just like Shaun. This backstory was scrapped, but this original design of his did not have any hint of him being an electronics store manager, nothing of his former life. He seems like more of a roamer, dirty clothing, unkempt facial hair, gloves, and a bandolier, looking as if he was someone that has long been a part of the zombie-stricken world, like he was a season 4 or 5 survivor from The Walking Dead, or like the cleaners of Back 4 Blood. And he also has a head bandage on his forehead. It's just kinda there. His appearance alone made him feel like a loner with a tough exterior, resembling nothing of the cheerful, bright palette appearance and personality he would exhume in the final cut of Lewis. While we know him as the overly positive yin to Francis's hateful yang, Lewis was originally to be portrayed as an extremely religious and frankly pessimistic individual. This was referenced in the fan film Left 4 Dead the movie, where Lewis's live-action counterpart suddenly drops his positive canter for his beta character philosophy.
God has abandoned us.
On top of him being super focused on religious ideologies, Lewis also seemed to have hated Bile of all people in his scrapped beta design, having been referenced to have constantly argued with the aging veteran to a point that players would want to split them up just because of their hostility towards one another. People wanted to break them up just so they would stop being so mean and so vitriolic towards one another.
When things go back to normal, Zoey, Bill, I'm giving you both jobs. Francis, I'm gonna teach your ass how to read.
Go to hell! Hey, Lewis, what were those things called in that video
Foggy.
you yammer on about?
Francis. You're thinking of head crabs.
Oh yeah.
Watch out!
A head crab. Thanks, nerd.
Head. Yeah, you're welcome, country boy.
Oh shit, woman! Oh shit! Funky smelling bitch! Shit! God damn it! Pretty ass bitch!
Thankfully, Lewis's personality was reworked from the ground up and modeled after a co-worker of Chet Falisek's named Joe, who described him as having a wholesome and positive demeanor.
There's a guy we worked with at one point, Joe. Joe's the kind of guy who's like, microwave can explode while cooking his food and get all over him, and he'll never get mad. He's like, all right, this is the start of this, and now I'll just continue on and figure this out, right? But so wanted to bring that in there where we just had that person who was kind of looking at the positive even in all the negative.
Lewis's final character design reflects this change in personality to shave him down in hair, muscularity, clothing, and more, and for him to have a brighter color palette to match this kind of energy. It's funny that both Lewis and Francis lose some kind of width in their designs, as well as all or most of their hair. The dynamics were completely different between all of the survivors, cutting down both distracting voice lines, repetitive character design traits like being overly hairy, and having the valve filter to kind of, shave down Turtle Rock's original character design shine through pretty dominantly here to make them more well-rounded to be replayable and more likable. But that's those in terms of the survivors of Left 4 Dead 1. But what about the infected they set out to kill by the thousands? The infected, for the most part, had stayed pretty consistent through development, having started out as just slow-moving Counter-Strike bots acting like zombies to evolve into the fast-moving living infected we know today, inspired by a viewing of 28 Days Later. The only major difference that needed to be cut were a wider variety of outfits for the common infected to wear. Beyond just the typical outfits that would go with some of the maps, there would have been a lot more. Although these outfits would be put into the base game of of Left 4 Dead 2 once the Last Stand update came around in 2020. It only took 12 years, but there you go. The largest differences for the infected were on what made them special. The hunter, much like Bill, had seen the least amount of changes to his outward appearance compared to his counterparts. While his appearance is not much different from his finalized vision, it's to note that he shaved his goatee and decided to clean off some of the blood around his face. Considering he is the most common special infected in lore and in spawning capabilities, having him blend in more with the commons of the green flu virus with less hair and blood, I guess, made sense. However, his abilities and vocal dynamics had some concepts and theories surrounding him. While many believed his original grunting and growling sound files were devised as the sound effects for an infected dog, a lack of any concept art and Valve themselves having denied there ever being a green flu canine being what the hunter was originally meant to be. The growls that it emanates simply aligned with what they envisioned for a stealthy infected that could leap long distances to maul a survivor. Its leap is a well-known part of the hunter's kit, allowing it to reach greater heights, traverse vertical areas on the fly, and crash land on survivors with great force. But sometime early in its development was the hunter also supposedly conceived to have the ability to cling to ceilings much like a bat, dangling upside down. Honestly, it would make for more interesting vantage points for the hunter to ambush survivors, being able to leap long distances from high ceilings. However, the amount of high ceilings in the original Left 4 Dead were not too often, and in most cases, very situational. If anything, putting itself in that position with an animation to follow probably would leave it easier to kill, basically putting its head out to be exposed even more than any kind of stance it has right now. Since the game was built with verses in mind from the get-go, it's possible having the player's perspective turn completely upside down when clinging to a ceiling and then attacking frequently. Changing this perspective from upside down to straight up constantly would be way too disorienting, and because of that, it was scrapped very early on. While the concept of him Spider-Manning on a ceiling while growling looks and would feel eerie as hell, it's understandable why this never saw the light of day. The hunter's abilities were also to be way beyond just crouching, pouncing, and wall jumping like the parkour variant he is. Early on, Turtle Rock toyed with the idea that the hunter would have other abilities to make him more fearsome. The first, lending him the unique trait of being able to regenerate health over time if he were to get away. An element never brought forward for any infected throughout the series, and for good reason. If you simply get away as a bot special infected or a player controlled infected, being able to heal up all the way if you just, hide. The hunter originally was also going to have the capability to detach from survivors whenever it wanted, meaning it could pounce someone, jump off them, and then pounce someone else and or leap away to safety. If you were to compound that with the hunter's release kit of being able to do scaling damage with the height of his pounce, if you remember in the first month of Left 4 Dead 1, you were able to do up to 100 or even more damage if you were to jump from great heights, and then freely get to run away and then regenerate your health from any bullets that hit you. That would have been insanely busted. The capability to do tons of damage, get off a survivor, and then regenerate all the health that you had lost from gunfire damage, that would have been broken as hell. The Dying Light precursor himself was supposedly capable of also pushing survivors that drew too close to him while he was standing upright, meaning no matter what, it could leap. The difference being, if it was standing up, it could push people while leaping forward, and then when it was crouching, it could pounce forward and pin you down, so it could either push or pin you. Obvious to see why this was cut, as this would have been easily exploited to yeet people off tall surfaces or put them in the hanging state. Although this lunging, or at least capability of him to jump away while standing upright, stayed consistent for bot-controlled hunters to this day, who, when injured by gunfire, will yelp with pain and then flee in the opposite direction without actually pouncing. You know that awkward jump that they do while they're standing up straight? Yeah, that would have been what you could have done to knock people around. But none of these features compare to the fact that the hunter at one point had one more trick up his duct-taped alpha sleeves, that being camouflage to basically be invisible. While not shown, test footage of zombie classes dictated how he could, quote unquote, fade out of view. Yeah, that's right, basically a chameleon. Yeah, think about that. If the hunter were to go up to a wall and basically go invisible, this would have been disorienting in the kind of playstyle that Left 4 Dead had. Having a special infected with this kind of potential and this amount of abilities is insane to think, especially with the polished and trimmed down form of the hunter we got. As they say, simplicity is key, and it was key here as well. But that's it for the hunter. Jumping out of view to see his longer, lankier, and chain-smoking brother in Claw, we take a look at the smoker's changes over time. We take a look at the smoker's changes over time. Our tall friend was way more into his own naming conventions when initially created. Instead of being a special infected that oozed smoke constantly, his first conceptualized ability was completely centered around becoming smoke. While no test footage ever existed, devs did state that he would have been able to pop in from a cloud of smoke, think Left 4 Dead's ghost mode spawn system, to surprise survivors, manifesting himself from a gas state to a physical state. From there, the OG smoker would have grabbed a healthy human like an anime club friend that forgot how to use deodorant, bellowing to you, "Where's my hug?" Once ensnared by the infected, you and him would disappear into the cloud of smoke where he would drag you meters away to separate and disorient the group. Think the jockey's role, but if the jockey were a Logia fruit user unable to be touched, and then the victim would dematerialize with them to disconnect them from the group. Really stepping up on the broken scale with this one. The concept of an untouchable special infected that could only be shot when appearing and just having a brief few second window to shoot it before it wisps a survivor away to an unpredictable location. This would have been awful with how attention focused it can be during hordes and recognizing threats on the fly. That smoky gameplay cleared out, development still sought to have smoke be a center focus of his kit. The next iteration of the smoker would see to him being able to billow out extremely dark, almost blackened smoke to both nearly blind survivors and to cause gradual inhalation damage. Basically, think the spitter's acid without the scaling damage scaler. So, his original goal was to drop in, smoke out or hotbox the survivors, and cause mass confusion. The smoker also used to have his smoke upon death do something more similar to the boomer, while the current version just plumes out a ton of smoke that slightly obscures vision and causes characters to cough and expose their outlines to player-controlled infected. The OG smoker's head supposedly would explode upon death like a pimple to release the black smoke and knock back survivors just like the boomer's death animation explosion. But that just wasn't going to be playing out for the smoker in terms of fun factor. His original appearance was pretty near and dear to what we know now. The cancerous tumor-like growths all over his head, but originally he was almost plague-like, having these boils and growths populate every inch of his exposed flesh, always leaving only one eye open for him to see, just lacking one important detail. Can you see what the difference is just from this concept art? It was when they decided to give him a more long-range and sniper-like ability that his iconic tongue was made to drape from his cranium. It was immediately devised as a way to drag survivors from afar. However, it did have some growing pains from the get-go. The tongue itself was extremely fast to pull people in, but the survivor also never dropped their weapon to be in the pinned state, meaning there was less of a window to prevent the smoker from pulling you off edges, but you had all of that time to shoot it without being helpless. In that time, the tongue also did not fully hentai around a person's torso. Back then, the tongue was made to wrap around your neck, choking you out. This original idea of only tongue in your neck may be what the sound file of killing a survivor ensnared by the smoker originated from. Instead of the sound of your spine snapping, it makes more sense that this is the sound of your neck taking a break. Much like the hunter, he also was able to release survivors from their pinned attacks freely whenever the player-controlled smoker wished, meaning it could smoke someone for a bit, and if help came from other survivors, it could simply release its tongue to get away. This would have made a player-controlled smoker way more powerful, and honestly, harder to deal with. The point of the smoker and basically any infected that could pin you was the risk-reward dynamic. Pinning a survivor means you expose yourself in exchange for high amounts of damage to the survivor that you hit, if you pull it off in tandem with other special infected or punishing survivors that separate from the group. The ability to just release any survivor at any given time would have diminished this element and made them way too strong. While these ideas were all axed, the smoker, his tongue, and smoke would become a part of his iconography. While he was shorter in the beginning days, smoking did not stunt his growth so that he would stand taller from all the other infected, so that his mere height would make him easier to spot in hordes alongside his now constantly spewing smoke. Now, on the opposite end of the lanky and tall ratio, we now go to the portly and round. The boomer definitely had his own share of a buffet of differences, but nowhere near the amount that the smoker and hunter had throughout concept and development phases. The boomer is known for spewing green bile onto survivors that attracts common infected by the droves. The top half of its torso being expendable to be explodable has also been a consistent element to its bloated nature. However, both of these elements were quite different in the days of Left 4 before. It wasn't originally bile that he vomited out, but purely a stream of copious amounts of high temperature blood, much like a rage infected. And upon explosion, the boomer would also send out dozens of gallons of blood in all directions. During this bloody outburst, both means of bodily fluid projection would actually cause tons of damage to survivors that was hit by it, not blinding survivors or attracting commons. No, just simply boom, instant harm. Think a flamethrower of red hot blood coming out from queso. Sometimes the boomer being positioned where it is made explosions causing damage to all nearby survivors much more irritating to deal with compared to just the vision impairment and horde summoning of today. Thanks to info from that channel Matt NF, the boomer also had the ability to choose when to explode in both campaign and versus, meaning it could cause great amounts of damage and knockback at will, sometimes being unavoidable for players, especially with player-controlled boomers. Sounds just like Back 4 Blood's Exploder, and we all know how well that worked out in the swarm mode, just awful. Sometimes you just cannot avoid the explosion, so taking damage from it was just not fun, so the damage dealing blood would be scrapped, coinciding with the scrapped concept of an entire other special infected. As we all know, there was one famously known as the Screamer. Turtle Rock and Valve had the idea of a special infected wrapped up in an asylum patient outfit with his arms bound that when spotting a survivor would just run away and then let out an ear-piercing scream to call for a horde, much like a car alarm. While other zombie games loved this idea of this Screamer and ran with it in name and concept, looking at you, Dead Island Riptide, Dying Light, World War Z, 7 Days to Die, and more, Left 4 Dead found that the Screamer was too detrimental to the flow of the game, having you actively pursue an infected that ran away from survivors, a concept that would later be reused for a small detail for the fallen survivor uncommon infected. This idea was not fun. The Screamer's design itself did not really fit in with what they were creating. You were going against stuff that was going after you, so for you to go after a special infected just to prevent a horde, it was not fun. So the Screamer would be taken to the lethal injection room sometime between 2005 and 2006, sometime before the QuakeCon 2007 demo. The horde summoning mechanic would be harvested from the Screamer's silent corpse and replaced repurposed into the boomer's vomit and death explosion, turning its harmful blood into an alluring bile. During those blood-filled days, the boomer also had a very slight difference in his appearance, simply being paler with more prominent bloody veins on his stomach, most likely to focus its appearance more on how its body now rapidly produced bile instead of just puking blood profusely like he was a member of War. With that in mind, not much was left for the boomer in his development, except for a minor detail change in the information a player was given during versus mode. During the open beta phase, infected players that played as the boomer could actually see how many infected could be summoned per each person affected by its bile, appearing as an indicator for the player to see, showing how many commons will be summoned at any given time if you successfully vomit on one survivor. This would change dynamically depending on the algorithm of the AI director, depending on how things are going for the survivors and more. While this is very neat to see how much it could change depending on where and when and how well or worse the survivors were doing, it was just added information that was largely bloated and inconsequential to the infected player, with how rapid gameplay can be and how boomers largely just needed to go in to blind, confuse, summon a horde, and initiate an attack for their special infected. Better to leave that information behind the scenes and not in front of us for the AI director to take care of and let the player have less to stress about. We don't need more numbers thrown at our face. Not waiting for the common infected counter to reach its supposed peak number before attacking, it's the minor details of omission that really add up for the experience that made Left 4 Dead so memorable. In terms of memorability, for most people, the witch is probably what pops up in their head when thinking of unique zombies from this series, and she too had seen some changes. But unlike all her male counterparts, she actually received the least outright adjustments. She was perfect in terms of gameplay execution and design. A frail woman that could go apeshit on you if you drew too close or startled her. It was a perfect way to have players control their fire and think about where and what they were shooting. But did you know that instead of just targeting the one person that triggered her and attacking them until either she or them died, she originally would hunt down and incap every single survivor after being triggered? Yeah, she would go to town, and early on, the devs discovered that the witch was easily wiping entire teams in seconds as they struggled to make distance and lay down fire. Run or shoot, Lewis used to say. Bill would say both, but it didn't matter because the witch was slicing them to pieces. All of this while her frenzied attack on down survivors would also have an AoE, an area of effect of damage, where if you got too close to her while she was attacking a down survivor, those long finger blades would cause a lot of damage to anyone nearby, deterring people from drawing close to focus fire on her. This also was deemed too unfair and, more importantly, unfun. So her area of effect damage was completely gone and she was nerfed to target one person, unless she was set on fire by either a gas can or Molotov to change her focus to the person that set her on fire. This could all be the reasoning to why some graffiti in safe rooms throughout the Left 4 Dead campaigns reference how the witch had been seen tearing apart upwards of 10 people at once, leaving in the concept of her group slaying ability as simple writing on the wall. But canonically, it's more than likely she will always target multiple people that disturb her. But in the realm of gameplay, the Valve gods had nerfed her mentality to be of a monogamous murder mindset. The witch also used to be a naturally black-haired woman with dark clothing. Nothing else different about her, just all black. I guess someone in the dev team went up and said,
"Why all the black? Why all the pearls? Why all the hair? Why anything?"
So she changed her hair and clothes to be all white in response. Realistically, it was probably to make her easier to spot in dark areas where you would be shining your flashlight, to make her easier to spot and to make her seem much more emaciated to fit in with the opening cinematic, where the crying mixed in with her disheveled state would lure people into thinking she was someone in need of aid. But overall, the witch didn't get much to eat in terms of revisions.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
Now, the last of the specials who stays bulked up as the only boss infected did see some variants back in his pre-release days, the Tank. The dude is peak physical condition, if you discount the leg day stuff, and he really saw the very least amount of change despite being what was most likely the second special infected ever conceived. What had been different was just minor variances in his total health pool and the speed in which he could pick up and throw debris, and even the concept of him being able to throw multiple rocks at once. And also, the Tank did sound kinda different. It is stated that he had much less hair on his head before he got a little bit of hair put back on, so at least the Tank beat male pattern baldness. Considering the game found its origins in solely focusing around versus mode, it's only fair to make a solid transition into talking about how different it was before going into the guns, supplies, and map changes. Conceiving the game around versus came with its own set of challenges, most notably how to make it fun. Because as that one guy at Nintendo once said,
"If it's not fun, why bother?"
While PvP mode in any game always naturally becomes ultra competitive and hyper-focused on balancing for both sides, the team at Valve and Turtle Rock decided that campaign mode should be made for those that want a more lax playthrough without having to stress about that competitive environment. Things would have been vastly different even from the moment of spawn for Versus if things stayed the way they were from what Turtle Rock had in mind. And that was the concept of being able to choose which special infected you wanted to spawn as, not balancing made by the AI director or randomly selecting what you will play as so everyone gets a fair shake at each special infected. It was just straight up you saying, nah, I'm gonna be Hunter, I'm not gonna be anything else. It's obvious why Valve stepped in to make infected choice randomized, as we did see in the Versus mode of Back 4 Blood. The self-proclaimed spiritual successor by Turtle Rock allowed players to choose their special ridden at all given times, and it became the sweatiest, most repetitive experience ever. People choosing tall boys that could grab and the kamikaze exploder over and over because of meta and just plain unfun experiences. That was the Back 4 Blood experience, and the same would have happened with Left 4 Dead 1, and if it even would have happened, Left 4 Dead 2. With 2 people going Hunter and 2 people going Smoker, it would have been people just constantly trying to do that to pin everyone at once, not making it fair. Having infected choice be randomized in tandem with the behind the scenes AI director making all the choices in terms of the infected made for a fresher experience for both teams going back and forth for versus mode while making people get good at every special to learn how they work, instead of leaning on a crutch like picking the same character over and over. On the note of choosing infected to take over, there was a brief period of time where there was an idea of taking control of common infected while you were dead as a special infected, to keep players engaged at all times and to give more playability to every facet of the green flu virus. However, this idea was scrapped as commons were just simply too easy to kill, and honestly was probably more taxing on servers to constantly switch between playable characters. Hell, even the Witch, the only non-playable special infected, was considered to be playable as a secondary boss infected, but due to her rather stationary positioning and static spawn, was too difficult to try and make into a playable feature. The walking of the Wandering Witch during daytime in Left 4 Dead 2 could be the leftover concepts for how a player-controlled witch could have moved around when spawned in. Besides that, Versus largely stayed as it was originally intended in the first game, leaving everything else to deviation in development. The campaigns you runned and gunned in, for instance, saw a large share of restructuring, especially that of No Mercy, which in of itself was originally going to be titled either Urban Underground or Hell Hospital. The apartments you start on the rooftops of were originally going to be a hotel, where you would fight your way down into the streets where a McKay's Market's convenience store would have been. The environment itself would have been much darker in some areas, with lighting being primarily how you would be able to see, mostly from much more light sources of lit windows and buildings, signs, and a much more brighter skybox with a blue tint and fuller moon. The first chapter's ending safe room originally was not found in the subway tunnel, but in a clothing store instead.
Let's get some shoes. Let's get some shoes. Let's get some shoes. Let's get some shoes.
The subways saw some renovation as well, originally being just a bunch of long, linear hallways with no real variation, making the zombies easy to funnel and kill. So basically, the subways were just going to be long and boring. The generator room, in which you turn on the door to progress, was also non-existent. It was still the generator room that we know, but it did not exist as what we know through the concept of crescendo events, because crescendo events did not exist yet. The room would have simply been a footnote where you could just speed run through to go to a staircase and progress without any slowdown. So no bunkering down in that side room behind the turret. Surface side, the sewers level saw most of its changes near the gas station. The gas station itself would have been a needed, accessible building in the level. In order to progress, you would have to go through the gas station just to get through the level. But the necessity of going inside it meant that some players ended up becoming cooked by the gas station explosion. That's basically mandatory in every single playthrough of the chapter. So the gas station was sidelined to circumvent people needing to draw near it to prevent accidental deaths and or trolling from teammates.
Oh no! Oh, someone blew up the gas station when I was too close to it. That was Billy. Thank you, Billy.
The scissor lift also did not originally exist. Again, there was no crescendo events. Instead, the survivors would have accessed the rooftop either via a nearby building and or the gas station, and then breaking open a small vent on the rooftop in order to access the warehouse. Thankfully, this vent was cut, as it would have been a nightmare to navigate with player-controlled special infected. The sewers themselves stayed relatively the same. However, in the alpha, there were 4 separate ways granted to the survivors in order to get into them. This was probably scrapped to lessen the chances of survivors splitting up to go to the path that they were familiar with on repeat playthroughs, with the final total access points being cut down to just 2 manholes. Now, the first finale of the series, The Rooftop, saw a lot of conversion, and I mean a lot. Look at this screenshot of how it was originally laid out. Now, let's compare it to what it looks like now. Can you spot the differences? It was way less spread out and more vertically inclined, with much more structures and buildings and way less open space to run around in, being much more claustrophobic and leaving much less room to breathe to get away from the infected, with even 3-story towers accessible via stairs to get cornered on, or full warehouses to chill on top of, but risk being smoked off by smokers and taking hellacious fall damage from. The environment was also much darker, making seeing infected a bit more tricky, having to rely on lights that are scattered around the environment. The helicopter pilot also had some of his interactions cut. Having originally spotted the survivors on the apartment rooftops, he would have directly instructed them to go to Mercy Hospital for evacuation to a military base. This was cut to just him giving out a citywide alert via megaphone to go to the hospital instead. This dialogue still exists in the files of Left 4 Dead, and is even referenced in the finale when the pilot excitedly states to the survivors, "You made it!" Getting to death toll, not much was changed outside a few minor details. The campaign poster itself shared early designs of the survivors, as well as a different tagline stating this: "When there's no more room in hell, these 4 are gonna make some space." Obviously, it's referencing Dawn of the Dead, but I can see why the tagline was changed, as it was just way too wordy and bloated, like how I write my scripts for these videos. The chapter titles also were all mostly different, being Chapter 1, The Caves, Chapter 2, The Drainage, Chapter 3, The Ranch House, Chapter 4, The Main Street, and Chapter 5, The Boathouse Finale. It would have been interesting to see how that ranch house would have panned out, but it's more than likely it was repurposed just to be minor portions of chapters in Blood Harvest. The finale for Death Toll itself would have been way different. Instead of going through those neighborhoods and a little bit of the forest to get to the boathouse, the residential home overlooking the river would have not existed and instead would have been a small 2-story houseboat. Not a boathouse, but a houseboat. Easily defendable, comparable to the home we got that could have so many parts of it broken open by the infected. As you can see from these early screenshots, there didn't seem to be much of anything else to this finale except the boat and the dock, leaving it to be a very shallow experience that desperately needed to be altered to make it an actual finale event. Imagine going to this tiny boat and just sitting there. While yes, a lot of finales there's always one designated spot, this would have been the most streamlined finale where there was just no other options. Now, the skyline of this map was also altered. Originally, it was just going to be a night sky with nothing else, just infinite darkness in the horizon. Then it was revised to having a burning city to hint at the connection between this campaign and Dead Air. Dead Air had a similar outcome to Death Toll, having not much altered. However, each campaign of Left 4 Dead, it is important to note, has a certain color palette to their environment to set each other apart. You always have these certain color codings or kind of vibe that lets you know what campaign you're in. Kind of like Death Toll had the dark, blue, and gloomy feel. Dead Air, in its final iteration, was its iconic, dark, warm, orange-like vibe. But that wasn't going to be the case, as it was going to be just like Death Toll in tone, being more depressingly blue and dimly lit, as if lit by moonlight. Now, there is a map called Tutorial Standards that also served as a streamlined version of the finale that we know today. It was repurposed of the third chapter of the campaign, originally called The Garage. It was repurposed again by the developers to be a hidden map file in Left 4 Dead that was accessible mainly to aspiring map developers, showcasing all the important elements of making a map, or more importantly, an entire campaign when it came to scripting, map design, panic events, spawn points, and more. It's really neat that a scrapped version of this map was reused to be a condensed tutorial for fan-made level designers. It just had a little bit of everything from the start of the campaign all the way to the finale. Now, on the note of the finale, the runway, it was going to be originally way darker, and I'm not being overly dramatic. The concept of this campaign being a burn-in city was apparently not on the original radar of the devs, as the finale seen here in this early screenshot is pitch black, with the only sources of light coming from a few lights and downed airplanes. Thank God this was changed, as you can probably imagine doing a whole 2-tank finale with luggage carts being flung around in this darkness imprisoning you that all you can see is absolute horror. One would only know. It would have been awful. Now, before the concept of connecting campaigns that were retroactively made into Left 4 Dead, if you didn't know, the campaigns were never supposed to be connected technically until Valve decided in Crash Course that yes, they were. The campaign of Damn It was created to bridge the gap between escaping in the full airplane at the end of Dead Air to arriving in the forest of Blood Harvest. While it is currently playable through the community, bringing it fully to life via what we saw as a bird's eye view of its map design, it is not known entirely why Damn It was scrapped. Turtle Rock had it planned out and had it copyrighted to their studio, but when they teamed up with Valve, Damn It was completely shut down, with Turtle Rock still holding the IP for this specific map. Maybe Valve was offended that they had a curse word that was being used for a campaign, or maybe they felt like 4 campaigns at launch were enough for the dev cycle and they decided to do some trimming. You can tell this campaign was cut very early in development, as the concept poster for it has some rough sketches of both the survivors and the infected, with none of the survivors or zombies looking anything near their final designs. Now, the last campaign of Left 4 Dead, Blood Harvest, saw the least amount of changes. In terms of how drastically different previous finales were, Blood Harvest would have originally began with Francis complaining that the airplane pilot was inept, and how could he not know how to land a C-130? This kind of dialogue would eventually be be reused in the sacrifice when Bile remarks on how every single rescue vehicle they got on became a dud and they needed to rely on themselves. The fog of blood harvest was also originally non-existent, making it much more clearer visually, not making it feel like the morning time that we know with that morning dew coming in. The greatest change came with the farmhouse finale. It was due to the fact that it showed no signs of becoming the military outpost that is constantly referenced throughout the campaign and the end goal of the survivors throughout their entire gameplay experience. It would have just been a lush green farmhouse with no discernible traits outside the iconic cornfield. When rescue finally did come to the non-militarized outpost, the rescue vehicle itself was not the armored vehicle that we know and love, but a truck with a minigun on the back, basically reusing some of the trucks that we have seen before. Change in the vehicle did make sense considering special infected canonically existing, and the threat of smoker tongues and open attacks from tank rocks would be much more pervasive for a flatbed truck. The driver of the army car also had cut lines referencing how the farmhouse itself was intended to completely be bombed and turned into scorched earth once him and the survivors escaped. This was most likely cut purely to just save dev time when it comes to putting in your resources. Now, one added note before we get off the campaigns, the Last Stand free survival update, that little map, was 99% the same as it was from concept, all except for the foghorn. Instead of using the lighthouse's sound system to call for rescue, it was going to be just you using the time-honored tradition of a radio walkie-talkie to radio for help. It's way more thematic for the lighthouse to play a more integral role in the bottom line of what happens to the survivors. Although to the survivors, it didn't really matter since no matter what in this timeline, rescue is never going to be coming for them, and they are doomed to die, unless you count the community-made update for Left 4 Dead 2. In terms of what the survivors can do and what they use to do it has also vastly changed. The incapacitated state, one of the most core components of survivor gameplay, originally did not force you to remain still in the position where you are downed. At first, survivors could crawl around to get themselves out of unadvantageous situations to more easily be picked up by teammates. That, and to bring us further into a chapter in a game about making distance. This was obviously nixed for balancing purposes, as being able to move around as an in-cap survivor just changed the dynamic of being in the dying state. Residual animations of the survivors doing this crawling thing remained within the code of Left 4 Dead 1 to be used in mods and add-ons. Honestly, it is cool to experiment with. I was in a modded server and we got to do this, and it was interesting. It honestly felt like we were Dead by Daylight down survivors, but now we were packing heat. Packing heat means packing weapons.
That's pink. Maybe don't go that way.
Why are you fucking gay? What have you done to me?
And the firearms and throwables of Left 4 Dead aren't what they used to be, but as to what was different, it's mainly magazine/clip sizes, spread, damage stats, and more. Overall, every weapon initially had the muzzle flash from their source get it? Of Counter-Strike. But the flash was changed to make the moment-to-moment gameplay a little less distracting and a little more solid as to not lose frame rate. The pump shotgun's maximum damage was 22 instead of 25. Early files also show how the original ammo counter system would have looked like, depicting shotgun shells that would gradually gray out on the side of the screen as they were shot out. The Uzi submachine gun was at first equipped with a flashlight to make the flashlight mechanic more natural looking instead of just having a random flashlight. It was intended to originally be a direct port of Counter-Strike's MP5N SMG. Evidence of this are in the game files as a price and animation listing, and even in the campaign posters that we can see, some of the survivors hold this scrapped weapon with a scope attached to it. This is also how it sounded. best weapon, the auto shotgun, is based on the XM1014 from Counter-Strike and originally used sound for the weapon. During development, the shotgun also had 9 shells in the chamber, a larger and less accurate spread with 2 less pellets. This was most likely changed to be more focused and to hit in longer distances to make the shotgun more reliable against not only hordes, but hitting special infected with how critical it is to be able to hit them consistently. The M16 assault rifle is directly derived from Counter-Strike's M4A1, with sound files from the source game being the same but slightly modified during development. The hunting rifle is in a similar boat, lending from Counter-Strike's SIG SG550. On that note, every single gun had a longer and more detailed animation of the survivor cocking the weapon or messing with the firearms in some way to make reloading them more realistic. These more detailed animations were shortened to what we know today purely for how fast-paced Left 4 Dead is. Every second in Left 4 Dead is crucial for a horde-driven experience versus the sweaty PvP shooter experience of using more realistic weapons with Counter-Strike. Of course, the only resource you had as a secondary weapon in the first game were the M1911 pistol. These are intended as a way to always have some kind of offense, even when on the ground or your primary weapon runs dry on ammo. But originally, the pistols also ran the risk of running out of ammunition as well, with a maximum of 240 bullets per pistol. Yes, that's right, you had a limited supply of bullets for your sidearm. Thankfully, this was changed since melee weapons did not exist at this point in time in the series, and the thought of having to shove every single infected to death until you found ammo would have been tiring and frankly irritating. This could have supposedly been circumvented in the alpha of the game, as the concept of giving your extra pistol on hand to teammates, like the mechanic of giving pills, was originally thought up but was ultimately scrapped. Handing pistols to teammates, that's just too much to handle. As seen in the intro to Left 4 Dead 1 as well, Zoey also has flashlights attached to both her dual-wielded pistols, possibly a scrapped concept of both pistols having flashlights, much like the flashlight attachment we mentioned earlier to the SMG. Grenades saw some tweaking or outright replacement, with the pipe bomb showing how the devs saw a problem with gameplay interaction and fixed it. At first, the pipe bomb did not blink or attract any infected towards it before exploding. You know, the whole point of it. So survivors would have had to perfectly time their throw and hope the fast-paced infected wouldn't all run away in time before being turned into a bloody mist. Stated in the developer commentary, it was basically useless for players since infected were always chasing you and doing it fast. That and the infected also originally had collision and hit detection with the grenades themselves, meaning when you threw a pipe bomb into a horde, that throwable weapon had the potential to bounce off of them and land right in front of you, ping-ponging between infected and more, making a large portion of encounters using the pipe bomb ending up blowing yourself up or not hitting any commons at all. It's very possible the pipe bomb was just simply a fragmentation grenade of some sort given its classic game explosive feel, and it's even more apparent since in Turtle Rock's Back 4 Blood that frag grenades were a usable throwable weapon alongside pipe bombs. The pipe bomb was eventually made to have a beeping sound and blinking effect to draw in hordes to actually make it useful in the explosion to actually hit them. While the original concept of the pipe bomb would be repurposed into the oxygen and propane tanks that can explode in the environment, Valve devs stated in interviews that the pipe bomb was also originally intended to be used as a way to combat the tank. Yeah, a way to stun him momentarily and cause large amounts of damage. Ironic, because pipe bombs are now the furthest thing from being anti-tank tools, whereas its counterpart, the Molotov, is the go-to anti-tank weapon. On that note, the Molotov was largely unchanged through development, still spreading fire and catching infected on fire, although it was designed to be in a differently shaped gray bottle instead. This was most likely changed to the brownish bottle we know now to make it more discernible from the gray pipe bomb. The Molotov was also more than likely implemented from the design phases of Half-Life 2, as a throwable Molotov was planned for the game but never incorporated into the series between Episode 1, 2, and Half-Life 2 itself. Maybe mollies can finally be thrown by Gordon Freeman in Half-Life 3.
Oh, a man can dream, though. A man can dream.
As mentioned earlier, melee weapons did not exist in Left 4 Dead, but apparently were considered for a short time. Apparently, developers had to make an ultimatum on their inclusion. They had to either design over half a dozen melee weapons for variety with different animations each, and swing distances, and more, or screw it, just give the pistols infinite ammo. The melee weapons were most likely cut for dev time, but at least melee weapons returned a year later in Left 4 Dead 2. It was still fresh on their mind. Now, gun attachments and even apparel, otherwise dubbed upgrades, were thought up as well for Left 4 Dead. Yes, you could change your survivors and have a different thing that they could do each chapter. Although they aren't ever included, they exist in the original game file and are accessible via commands for survivor_upgrades1 on a dedicated server. They were never referred to in any trailers, press releases, or even developer commentaries. The idea of compounding features for survivors to utilize against the zombie hordes was scrapped pretty damn fast, as it was all just glorified perks. And as we saw with Back 4 Blood's whole gameplay focus, those features lose their luster over time. They're cool to mess with the first few times, but then it becomes too much to manage. And if you think about it, it is another example of Turtle Rock's ideas that seem fun on paper, but just wouldn't work out, and that's why they were filtered out once they were connected with Valve. But here is a brief rundown of everything that was considered for survivor upgrades and perks. First, there was going to be a Kevlar vest that would reduce all incoming damage by a certain percentage, a perk called Prevent It to negate Boomer Bile once a chapter, ledge save, allowing a survivor to pick themselves up from a ledge once per chapter. Second Wind allows a survivor to recover from the incapacitated state once without aid. Goggles, which negates the Boomer Bile's blinding effect. Hot Meal, increasing your health all the way to 150. Laser Sight, the same thing we saw brought into Left 4 Dead 2, nothing wrong with that.
The Laser Sight weapon upgrade came from an experiment during the development of the first Left 4 Dead, though we didn't end up shipping them at the time.
The Combat Sling, which reduces weapon recoil on all of your firearms. High Capacity Magazine, which increases magazine size for all firearms. Hollow Point Ammo, which increases weapon damage across all of your firearms. The Knife, that allows survivors to get themselves out of a smoker's pull or a hunter's pounce once per chapter. Smelling Salts, which speeds up the revive animation for when you're picking other people up. Ointment, that allows survivors to run faster when they get below 40 health. Reloader, faster reloading on all firearms. An upgrade called Flash Bulb. It doesn't really have a description, but if I had to make an assumption, it probably just made the flashlight brighter.
Bitch, I can't see!
Especially if you think about how dark a lot of the levels used to be, it might have been necessary. And then last, Blinding Flash. Create and use a flashbang grenade to use against the infected, blinding and stunning them. Hell, even every single door in the game had the mechanic of being able to be locked by survivors, making doors take upwards of 3 to 4 times longer to be destroyed by both common infected and special infected. Literally locking player-controlled infected out just to smack at a door for long periods of time and then get shot trying to just play the game. Hearing all of these perks and mechanics read out, god damn, would Left 4 Dead have been a miserable experience on the versus side of things. Oh, what's that? You punished a survivor that ran off on their own? Oh, you idiot! You didn't account for the knife upgrade. Oh, you downed 3 survivors with 2 hunters and a smoker and a boomer? Nah, second wind. They all picked themselves up. Are you trying to attack a survivor as a hunter? Oops, you just got flashbanged in the face back to back by 4 different survivors. It's obvious why these were never mentioned in interviews or promotional material. Valve did not want people knowing about it, and they didn't want people asking for it. Valve saw how unfun this would have been for the general audience and nipped it in the bud. No wonder this bloat of perks and upgrades carried over into Back 4 Blood and how quick things died out for that. It's just going to be way too much to manage and take account of, and makes it more competitive and have people go, "You're not using that certain perk? What's wrong with you?" Now, don't get me wrong, it would have made campaign slightly more interesting, but it also would have detracted from the whole core experience of replayability and what was, a quick arcade shooter for people to hop in and get into that it's set out to be. Left 4 Dead is to sit down and start gunning. You don't have to think too much. And that last note is the most crucial statement of the entire basis of this video, of what Left 4 Dead could have been. The sheer amount of changes from concept to reality and how different everything was is not a foreign concept to any development cycle in movies, games, shows, and so much more. But here it's obvious how Turtle Rock envisioned the game and were given Valve's expertise to sharpen it and really shave down the edges to make it a smooth experience, to become a classic in gaming history. A lot of elements that were omitted ended up being key features in Back 4 Blood. Character dynamics and appearances were basically what cleaners would be in that game. Survivor upgrades being the perk card system that largely bloated the game and made the quick to turn on and just play nature of Left 4 Dead obsolete, with having to make builds and know how each perk works. The nature of each gun, weapon, and layout of each campaign was made to be quick and easy to understand and usable without issue. That's why there's single ammo piles and just a few weapons. You didn't have to think too much. You're like, okay, that's an automatic weapon, that's a shotgun, that's a sniper, that's it. That's all there was to it. Left 4 Dead still has its share of bugs and features all these years later. I will not deny that. Left 4 Dead, it's a 16-year-old game that have bugs that just shine through. It used to be on Left 4 Dead 1, if you smacked it a bunch, you could just launch yourself. The infected being discernible wherever you may be and having perfect counterplay versus what we were going to get, especially with the hunter's invisibility powers and pushing people, the smoker's gas form to teleport wherever it wanted, and the damage blood throwing of the boomer. Having things more simplified, less to their kits, readable, and counterable makes it more fun. They were simplified and had less to their kits from the initial concept phase, but it largely worked for the entire gameplay experience. The survivors themselves, down to their appearance, attitude, interactions, and more, were refined to be more realistic, to be more relatable, to be, well, fun to play as. Remember, Left 4 Dead largely is an experience of 95% only these 4 characters, so making their dialogue enjoyable, informative on what's going on around them, and relatable is very crucial. That was very understood in the first game, and especially going into the second game. I cannot imagine having liked them as much if Lewis was constantly verbally violent towards Bill, or Francis and Zoey hitting on each other, if people in the alpha days were separating more purely from what the original dialogue was. I can only imagine how bad it would have been if it kept till release. People online and my friends already have a hard time sticking together and then running off on their own, but having Bill probably say some borderline messed up shit at Lewis, or Lewis hating on him, or Francis and Zoey talking about macking it up in the back alley would have justified just leaving the group altogether for some people. The fact that we went from these survivor designs to this just shows that the design philosophy had vastly changed, and it was only during it was a couple year time span. It was a zombie apocalypse that suddenly spread out, having people look completely decked out and battle hardened only 2 weeks after first infection, and what was basically a day or two for them when the zombies started attacking did not make sense. It showed that there was room to improve and work on. Everything originally was going to be darker, less engaging, bloated, and as I've stated multiple times before, less fun for a general repeating gameplay experience. Yeah, you can say the darker environments made it more creepier, but trying to shoot commons, especially on a difficulty like expert, would have made it just unfun. Yeah, the hunter having more abilities like turning invisible, that would be fun for a short period of time, but it would get old going against it. This game was noted and condensed into a perfect gameplay loop that would only be refined more once its sequel, Left 4 Dead 2, would come out merely a year later, using so many of the scrapped ideas and more concept ideas that would go into it. Only Left 4 Dead 2 had just as many changes, revisions, and cut content as the first. Or actually, I think Left 4 Dead 2 had even more changes. But that is a video for Left 4 Dead was a smash hit on release, and the future of the franchise was up in the green flute-filled air. What would be next for the dynamic zombie shooter? Valve had tons of ideas for DLC for Left 4 Dead, but plans changed rapidly during development. Behind the scenes, there was so much content that Valve wanted to add to Left 4 Dead. Only problem was with what they wanted to bring to light, and just couldn't work with how Left 4 Dead was made. The coding, problems, and more would just make everything so much harder to implement into the base game and cause problems down the road that a sequel was unanimously decided behind the scenes by Valve to release exactly 1 year after the first. There were a lot of ideas, elements, and concepts that were either tweaked, completely altered, or even left alone at the grocery store while mom went to wire $200 to a Nigerian prince. Bridging the gap between 1 and 2, let's see what was devised, conceptualized, and euthanized in a little under a year. Today, we are exploring everything that would or could have been with the second installment. These are the original plans for Left 4 Dead 2.
Baby, they're gonna wish we had.
I know, sweetie, I know. The first thing you see when buying a game, turning it on, or getting to the title screen is, well, the title. And with that is what would have been the funniest tidbit in this video. The sequel was originally not going to be called Left 4 Dead 2, but instead referred to by some devs as Back 4 More. I get what you're thinking, and I can get what they were going for at the time, mostly trying to keep in line with the 4 motif and a sequel. Honestly, didn't feel like a title for a successor, a direct one, and why a 2 was slapped on instead. That specific title was not forgotten though, as people at Turtle Rock that worked on Left 4 Dead 2 would carry the will of the back prefix on their backs when making Back 4 Blood over a decade later. Now Valve sought to making the dynamic of the next cast of survivors feel more organic, to make them feel like realer people that were forced together by circumstances more so than the first cast of Zoey, Bile, Lewis, and Francis. While the OG group were all basically heavily altered over time, even down to their in-game models, the second group had less revisions and final results, but much more changes in other areas. The Left 4 Dead 2 survivors experienced growing pains while being realized into their final designs. Again, not as much as the first group, but interesting nonetheless. It's very interesting to note that we did have a concept art of a group of survivors that looked both vaguely and shockingly similar to our second group. Posted by the dev team to the official Left 4 Dead blog in 2013 was this sketch, dating all the way back to 2005, predating even sketches of the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors. From left to right, it's obvious who is who and how much things had changed from 2005 to early to mid 2009. Coach more than likely a direct homage to Sergeant Kenneth Hall from 2004's Dawn of the Dead. Shotgun in hand, same cheekbone structure, similar attire, minus the ravishing mustache and, being more physically fit. Nick's spiritual concept art looking like Bruce Willis out of Die Hard, just a bit more tatted up. I feel like that full arm sleeve of ink carried on into Francis's design, with his little cig being popped into the mouth of Bill. Rochelle is near identical to her release look. I had a hard time figuring it out, but after looking into black female leads of the 80s and 90s, I landed on Kimberly Ellis, specifically in her role in 1996's Set It Off, where she played a mom that joins a bank heist to get her kids out of poverty. Ellis's character, being the only survivor with no real visual or physical connection to their final design, is blatantly based on the character William Foster from 1993's Falling Down. Like 1-to-1, maybe a bit more rugged and buffer, but that is Foster hands down, even to the 2 pins in his pocket protector and his movie poster shotgun. I wholeheartedly believe that this overall character design was repurposed into Back 4 Blood's Hoffman. Now, if I was a betting man, I would assume that all 4 of these sketches here were just placeholders referencing badasses with guns throughout movie history. Beyond those drawings that serve more as the idea of a group of 4 badasses, what changed about the core tenets of each of the sequel's cast of ragtag people? Well, the first of which being the overtime de facto leader and one-man cheeseburger apocalypse himself, Coach. Probably the most consistent survivor of the new batch, having always been conceived as a large, stout black dude with a background in leading others. Coach was originally supposed to be even fatter, though.
You tend not to see really big, heavy characters in games because it's hard to animate and do things. Even Coach is slimmed down from when I originally envisioned him.
But due to both the strain on animations to make something more jiggly and the realism of fat people running around from fast-moving infected means that he had to be thinned down just a wee bit. But we all know the real reason. It was because if he got any bigger, that his sheer godliness would have wiped out the green flu pandemic in less than 12 hours. It's straight facts. But what was the most different about him as a character in the early days was mostly just what he chose to wear. One piece of concept art showed him donning a football helmet, wearing a whistle around his neck, trying to be in your face or on your face with his football connections. That and wielding a compound bow, but stuff about that we'll get into later when discussing weapons. His clothing was also slightly different, having slightly different color schemes and embroidered insignias, seen here in white and blue with a big red S. Then Coach would land closer to his final design when Left 4 Dead 2 was teased at E3 2009, but with a little blue shirt and ML on his top, before becoming the purple yellow menace, repping FHS on his shirt. Now we got our boy Ellis. He was also not one to see the point in changing what was largely a good thing going. Although in the beginning, Eric Lading had not originally been the voice actor behind our favorite redneck. The original glory would have gone to Nathan Vetterline, the voice of Team Fortress 2's arrogant New Yorker, the Scout. Can you imagine how that would have sounded?
Next time eat a salad. Yo, if you didn't want me to kill you, you should have said something. Eat it, you mute frickin' moron.
But due to Left 4 Dead 2 taking place in the American South, and with Ellis coming from that area, having a voice more connected to a Brooklyn accent for him would have seemed very out of place. Valve would turn down Nathan seeking a more appropriate Southern accent. Funnily enough, just like Coach, Ellis had a slight color palette swap to his shirt, originally being a white and blue design rather than the shirt that would become an Xbox 360 avatar item that we can never get again, the Bull Shifter shirt. Seen in the E3 2009 teaser here, this cosmetic of Ellis must have stayed late into development, as in the Parish poster, Ellis's original top didn't quite yet get dropped, and has stayed on the Parish's poster ever since. Nick. Then we got Nick, who might seem like somewhat of a jackass most of the time. Snarky, abrasive, and sarcastic, to say the least. But what if I said he was a jackass? Like the face of Jackass. Literally, lead developer Chet Falasek stated during the development of Nick's character design and backstory that a certain person from the famous TV show was used to really get a grasp of where they were wanting to go with Nick.
There'll be a bunch of these sketches, and then they'll have the little bio with them maybe, and we'll start talking about these characters, and often the shorthand we use is the heads are famous people, and that's the way to kind of short circuit and go, it's this kind of character. So Nick was originally Johnny Knoxville, and then eventually we took him off because he really wasn't quite that kind of like troublemaker.
Johnny Knoxville being a very temporary placeholder as the kind of jackass they were looking for meant more of a dick. So less jackass, more dick ass. While this was recently brought to life by the lead developer, it's been well known since Left 4 Dead 2's release that Nick wasn't always just a con man with an expensive suit. Stated in the developer commentary,
The writers originally devised a biography for a convict character. There was an idea that here in the lawless world of the infected, this escaped convict, sick of wearing prison clothes, had taken the effort to loot a very expensive white suit from an abandoned clothing store. He might as well survive the apocalypse in style. This concept gradually evolved into the riverboat gambler.
While the overlap of convict to con man can have a wide margin of difference, some of his character dialogue still insinuates a life of crime and violence. But he wasn't always going to be a criminal mastermind, or at least a dick that liked to do illegal shit. Both Nick and Ellis could have also had their backstories be something completely different as well, with what was described as a fireman being a playable character in the game, to give some weight to why at least one of the survivors would know how to expertly use those fire axes that players can now pick up for melee attacks, considering the newness of the mechanic and why sidearms and melees were all that were available in the first half of Dead Center Chapter 1. It would also explain why a firefighter would be there, since, you know, there was a fire that was slowly but surely spreading across the Vanna Hotel. But the idea of a firefighter survivor would quickly be shelved by Valve for the sake of the survivors' dynamics. Chet Falasek would go on to say how a concept artist really wanted to implement one of this profession.
He really wanted a fireman. I don't know why. And he just did like a whole bunch of things of firemen. But, you know, my thing is like, if you have a character who is a authority, people are going to bow down to that authority just at some point because they're the expert or they have the opinion. And so I don't like to have that in there.
Take note of that, what he said, that it was not being interesting. Development of the main cast wanted there to be strictly an interesting chemistry between all four main people. So having a fireman with a commanding personality may have been less impactful to what we know today. More so to focus on four more civilian-like people navigating the zombie apocalypse for the wider audience. And then we got our girl Ro. On the subject of separate career paths, no one takes the cake on their beta job resume more than her. Before landing her job in canon as an assistant producer for a local news station, Rochelle had worked in the minds of Valve staff as a bartender, a Clevelandite, a singer, and, most interestingly, a DMV worker. Chet Falasek was hell-bent on trying to make Rochelle into a big old DMV worker based purely on interactions he and some of the Valve team had with the female DMV employee in Cleveland, Ohio, saying that having grown up in the big city that...
This is the one I really, really wanted to make. She was going to be from the DMV and from Cleveland. Growing up in Cleveland, the women who worked at the DMV were the most powerful women we knew.
Through the writing phase, though, it was deemed that this character centered around the personality and attitude of a big old DMV employee just wasn't as engaging. Chet said he really wanted to appeal to real-life DMV workers and to be the guy who put a nice DMV employee into a game. On the topic of women Chet knew in Cleveland, he had also been in the process of writing Rochelle close to the personality of one of his ex-girlfriends at Cleveland State University. While he was excited to have this fleshed out, a Valve lawyer quickly stepped in once interactions between the survivors were brought to the table, saying that they were entering troublesome territory if they went forward with this version of Rochelle, saying a more real version of a woman from Cleveland would have been problematic, especially for what the lawyer had been telling Chet in regards to what she was saying to Coach. Whatever that means, you can come to a conclusion yourself. But a true blue Cleveland-oriented Rochelle would never be, although the city would remain her hometown.
I told you. What did I tell you? Didn't I tell you? 'Cause I told you.
And when did I tell you? A long time ago. And what did I say will happen when I told you? Exactly what just happened.
Chet also said that very briefly he did explore the idea of her being a singer, listening to the song Bang 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 by Mark Ronson on repeat. He dramatized the female vocals on the song as a survivor for Left 4 Dead 2, thinking her up as a singer from the Bronx. Especially in a game like Left 4 Dead 2, where you're going to be hearing these characters talk a lot with thousands of lines of dialogue. Next on Rochelle's job history was one that was at a bit of a crossroads. As they were finalizing her backstory, they were torn between making her what she is now, an assistant producer for a big TV station, or a surly bartender, carrying over the ideas of a boisterous, big old DMV worker with some junk in her trunk. But due to Coach already being set in stone at that point, the idea of a surly or powerful woman next to the large and in charge Coach didn't really pan out for the team's ideas, with development preferring to make characters thinner for previously stated purposes. And they didn't want to have two bulky characters. So what would be described as a surly bartender or a commanding DMV worker would not have fit well with the skinny Rochelle we know and love. The assistant producer ultimately makes more sense though, to give better reason to why a woman from Cleveland happened to be in Savannah, Georgia when the shit hit the fan, and to give reason to why she would know a good portion of information about the green flu virus and the specific special infected that have been cropping up due to her news gathering background. As she was finally set in stone story-wise, her design still needed some ironing out, having been that of the portly DMV employee looking, well, a bit of a stereotype for black women, but matching the vibe of a boss bitch for a zombie apocalypse. After taking some Ozempic and time traveling to the era of Phallusec's other multiplayer venture, the Anacrysis, Rochelle had a brief concept stint looking like a foxy survivor. But this appearance, just like when she was envisioned to be a singer with a hipster vibe, didn't really fit the environment of where she was going to end up, especially for a setting in the late 2000s. She would eventually land to a near identical final design, yet with a different, more fuller and longer hairstyle and her lack of Depeche Mode support on a yellow shirt. Rochelle, hands down, has probably the most changes to her overall design and story and everything else across the spectrum, more so than all other 7 playable survivors. And that is saying a lot because the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors had a ton of iterations and even completely different models. Despite this, she would still end up having a good chunk of her recorded and even included dialogue cut from the game and only accessible via developer console for over a decade before the community-driven Last Stand update was released. Why these lines were cut is largely unknown. It left her feeling dry and boring compared to the colorful nature of her 3 male counterparts. Now, you could say that it's possible that lawyers may have stepped in similarly, like when Chet was making Rochelle to be like his ex, to not portray Rochelle in particular in a certain way. But that's just a theory. A row theory! The cast of the Carriers may have seen some middling lows and extreme highs in their development. What about the Green Flu Gang's special forces? Well, you'd think with only a year to implement ideas, ton of scrapped content and etchings on them. But oh boy, did Valve go to town on trying to figure out what would work, especially for them. First off, we have everyone's favorite self-love advocate, the Charger. Having been the poster child of new Special Inflicted up to release, being the first shown in a surprise showcase at E3 2009, displaying the sole focus of its development being around the gameplay of ramming into survivors with a cattle-like battle cry, with one part of its body being huge to get the job done. Its concept phase saw a lot of variation in how they wanted it to look, feel, and move. In fact, just like Rochelle, it holds the record in its own group of having the most changes. While the design of the Charger was being hammered out, Valve simply used a recolored Hunter in-game to test out its abilities. Both developers and concept artists working both in tandem and separately to get the Charger finalized. At first, it was nowhere near the singular arm-focused beast we know today, instead looking more like a battering ram with most of the growth in its body being in its torso and its arms being shrunken down, with a cracked open mouth and decayed face that saw some tweaking here and there. But this didn't last too long. Maybe the silhouette of its design was too close to the roundness of the Boomer, a key feature in character recognition in fast-paced games like Left 4 Dead and even Overwatch, where making them quickly recognizable not just by design but by shape. Its original method of attacking the survivors synced up more with its original concept art. At first, its main method of attack was simply to charge into survivors, knocking them off their feet that it ran into, but not grabbing them at first, simply running them over. As its gameplay structure was tinkered with, we saw its offensive means coinciding with its body mutations. The emphasis would shift to not just ramming, but slamming. The bloated physique would stay rounded out in its next iteration, but now with a head consumed by its tumor-like body, with its left arm and leg completely swollen. The idea of the beefy swinging arm was slowly evolving, with design notes saying that it gave out a mighty woo when charging in. Maybe something like this. The team was dead set on making the Charger the most zombie-looking special infected yet, while others were more mutated-looking people. Having a gory, innard, exposed variant just felt right, and a lot of the Charger's appearance would reflect this. The Charger's arm was now a primary focus of the design team. The turd cocoon of an arm was there, but the face looked like it was stripped right off the tank and slapped on a Fallout 4 ghoul's body. A more zombie-like appearance would stay throughout the next few concept arts, focusing on a bloody implosion from the body's mutations. The Charger's attack philosophy was all about a dominant arm at this point, as at the end of its charge, it would do an overhead slam attack to really give a powerful bam where it would proceed to grab and pummel you. It's most likely easy to see why this was changed, as being able to slam into a group and send them flying with the advent of being able to just run away freely could have been a broken ass time. The concept fed into these designs here, the team really wanting to show how the body was prioritizing one arm and legs at the expense of all other parts of the body, particularly with these two, both showing how the green flu mutations basically peeled the flesh off its face to expose its skull, maybe to make the skull a part of its battering attack with a hardened cranium. Its design was way more bloody and gory, with this second iteration really going hard on the rot and blending of muscles at high cost. Like, good God, look at that gaping maw it had. The chin ripped wide open to blend with the torso, and its left arm left withered and rotten as its other arm looks like it's suffering from gigantism.
Good Lord. Gigantism.
The Charger's dominant arm was of course the focal point here. The other arm is basically useless. The Charger's attack would have another change at this point in time, using this dominant arm to kind of be piercing forward for a targeted assault. Its charge attack, however, would immediately end the moment it hit its first survivor for it to start slamming them. It's easy to see why this was scrapped. It kind of just takes away all the oomph and fun with the Charger, but both the concept of this bloody form and its stopping on a dime were shelved in favor of a more earthy, balanced, and reckless final form. The Charger's final concept art would land on this, looking similar to what we got, yet with a more caved-in head, scrawnier leg, and a way more decayed-looking face with a lot more blood, smoothing its skull more in the final product, and only really having its nose removed with some scabbing over a lot of its frame. An integral part of the special infected are their audio cues and vocalizations. The Charger also saw some variety to its diegetic sound, having a guttural screech that could be heard echoing in the E3 2009 teaser. Here it is, isolated. A bit more porkish sounding in nature and a tad more high-pitched than the Charger's current sound and feel. A swine-like squeal that may be carryover from a scrapped special infected only referred to as the Hell Hog. Similar in nature to how people thought the hunter's growls and yelps were repurposed from the concept of an infected dog. Yet in this case, it is actually real and a possibility since the Hell Hog actually had concept art and was confirmed by the dev staff to have been worked on instead of that infected dog thing that was only spread through word of mouth through the Left 4 Dead community. The Hell Hog was going to be a thing, but they figured, zombie animals, that's really not our thing. The high-pitched tone of the Charger's original sounds was probably pitched down since both its new counterparts of the Spitter and Jockey were already high-pitched. The sound team wanting to give better depth to the warnings you receive when the special infected were out and about getting ready to rip you to shreds. Just like their silhouettes, the sounds are to make things more discernible, so a deeper makes sense for that purpose. Many people also believe that the Charger is the only special that can actually somewhat speak human-like phrases in the midst of its squealing and grunting. The community has pieced together what they believe are some of these words. Now, Valve did confirm during recording and putting him together that his angry muttering was all non-verbal, and that the more violent squeals and shrieks were a bit confusing to players though, as him constantly making these noises made it hard to discern if he was either idle or preparing to attack. So a more toned down version of this vocalization was made to combat all of the stuff we were hearing, making him a mini-tank capable of insta-kills for over a decade to come while hearing those pig-like squeals toned down.
See you, man.
I'm alive.
Alright, I'll go res you, don't worry.
Yeah, don't jump down here, you can get him.
Now we got our female exclusive special, the Spitter, who went through a lot of transitional phases as there were many concept designs and arts attached to the development of this support special. The first looking less like an infected that's been mutated and more just a zombie version of the farmer's wife in that American Gothic oil painting. Just more Beetlejuice or Tim Burton like in the facial region, especially those eyes. Feeling more so that they just wanted a female special infected with this design, not really taking into account that it should reflect how it's supposed to mutate to coincide with its power, specifically the overproduction of stomach acid. The Spitter would drastically change in its second form, becoming fat, round, and even Asian-like in its appearance with a more relaxed apparel. Basically, kind of like a beta female boomer, focusing on the character's production of highly acidic stomach acid, but just bloating it like the boomer. Easy to see why this didn't make it too far into production, but the girth was passed on in legacy to Jesus fucking Christ, this abomination. Getting closer to the final product, it appears that the acid production of the Spitter in its body would have literally dissolved its arms off and even its clothes, causing the body to look like it's bloating out and melting all at once to look like a giant demon turd, which ironically whoever made this, designed this, wanted to let people know that it's shitting itself constantly because they wrote poopy in a little note written next to its ass. Maybe this version of the Spitter would have had a little brown shit trail following it, just like the Spitter has when she has green acid following it wherever it goes, but imagine the voice lines of the survivors if they were looking up and suddenly they got some Spitter shit in their mouth. It honestly, that probably wouldn't have helped their ratings, and just having an infected that has constant poop being trickled out, that just wouldn't have worked. The Spitter would finally get close to completion with its next mock-up. Dissolved lips, high heels, and pigtails that stood up like antenna. It definitely stood out to be its own special in recognition. Its stomach became bearded up in conjunction with its stomach acid production, but was rapidly scrapped to avoid connections to her looking pregnant and then the implications with that. It was rocky territory that they wanted to avoid. The guys at Valve loved everything else about her, but decided to flatten her out. taming her antenna hair down, making it where it was just pigtails going downwards, sagging her stomach and boobs, and making her eyes sunken in with a more swiveled lower mouth, leaving it wide open to shoot out projectiles, make Haktua memes over 10 years later, and working on an office job.
Take a look.
Holy shit! Someone put a towel under her or something.
The only thing left for our wet girl was her tramp stamp, in which Chet Falasek had his name put on her lower backside. They removed it to what they said was for equality.
Spitter actually had a tramp stamp for a little bit that was my name. That was my wife. I was like, what do you say about her?
Are you a hitter for the spitter?
But actually, Gabe tapped me. I was like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I know. We should remove that because it's not cool to call people out. Everybody's equal. Because they are. Like everybody contributed. Everybody on that team was amazing.
Okay, Chet. With her finally done, this would all culminate into her main attack method, which also saw some variance through time. The highly acidic liquid that it would spew out would also go through multiple different color-coded iterations. Instead of just being pure green throughout its pooling phase, it originally went from green to yellow to red, indicating to the player how damaging the spit would be if it were touched during each phase. This was most likely changed for both realism and gameplay purposes. Having the spit remain green both made it feel more grounded in reality instead of rapidly shifting colors, and it also made the hazard of this AoE less predictable, since the spit scales in damage the longer it's out. Not having blatant color indication made it less likely for people to pinpoint what stage of damage scaling it was at. Basically, people would be less likely to try to go through the acid if the spit was always green instead of green, meaning it's okay to blitz through, especially in the hectic gameplay environment of Left 4 Dead. Another feature of the spit would have been the acid sticking to survivors. Yeah, if it hit a survivor, the acid would cling on and cause the residual damage, but something you could not get out of, being a hellishly high scaling 3 to 4 second damage drop that you could not get off of you. Thank God that was dropped. The spitter's death is also known to drop a mini pool of acid, but originally the pool would have operated like the smoker's death cloud, creating an acid mist that would cause minuscule damage to anyone that walked through it. So basically, the smoker's scrapped smoke mechanic. She was also said to have run much faster on her feet since she was so frail with a minuscule 100 health pool. But having the support infected with the highest damage output in the game, being able to run off in the blink of an eye and to dodge gunfire more easily would have been almost game breaking, especially in versus mode. The spitter also walked in a more comical way in line with her pigeon-toed feet, but found that beta testers would mock the way she moved and decided to make her locomotion a bit more straightforward and less janky. Now, before we move on, just quick note, fucking D. Bradley Baker voiced her shrieks. Can you believe that? I mean, listen to what he's done before and then listen to what he sounds like here.
For what? In case we need to intrusivitate vomiting?
There's nothing wrong about wanting to go into the girls' bathroom.
6-7?
Actually, my name is Rex, Captain, 501st Clone Battalion.
You can open up the chambers in your throat to make it larger. You can modify the column of air. You can just squinch it up there in all these just horrific kinds of ways.
We are the jockeys are we.
And we got the Jockey. Our maniacally laughing, scoliosis-stricken short king was devised with the idea of taking control away from a survivor by constantly dragging them in a desired direction while they tried to resist his influence while, riding him. Having always had the punny title of a jockey derived from the horse jockey profession, even having a placeholder model apparently that was a common infected in jockey attire while the jockey's design was being worked on. At first, it appeared to look like a very emaciated mutilated child zombie that snapped to a survivor's back. Despite it having facial hair and some facial structure that pointed towards it being a full-size man, shrunken down, or even a little person, it's for this reason that this design was probably scrapped pretty early on. As we all know, children in zombie media, it's just a big no-no. Better to avoid controversy of having to kill a kid zombie than to push this design forward. Its appearance was then converted to something more simian-like to match its movement and behavior, gaining a hunchback and charred-looking skin and a complete lack of clothes. This burnt Oompa Loompa really not looking like something out of Left 4 Dead. The cracked flesh and monkey-like nature and blood-red eyes feel more akin to something like Resident Evil's diverse pool of enemies. Designs for zombies in Left 4 Dead need to be less about being nightmarish and more of realistic mutations to mindless people having some grounding in reality with how people can change. However, the head and posture were going in the right direction. Its next step was to go way harder in the paint, and I mean the red paint, because they just straight ripped all the skin off the jockey's face and just doused him in blood, leaving him to be a skull jockey more than a special jockey, still naked and burned with bloodier limbs. In this design, it even has the jockey completely binding the survivor's arms rather than clawing at them and obscuring their face, just kind of giving a big hug. Funny how this concept art went backwards in progression, both in the style that they were going for and the gameplay mechanics around the final rendition. A separate render was later released by Valve, showing what looked like a three-way infant of the previous three jockey concept arts. You've probably seen this particular one before on the thumbnail of that one GameRanks video from almost 10 years ago, having even less in common with the final product that we got and looking like the charred version of Chucky doing back shots on Ellis. They finally got their shit together with the jockey when they gave him clothes for the first time and a regular looking human face, just minus the lips and a neck that's fused into the back with yellow eyes instead of red, looking way less bulky and much skinnier than anything before, giving him more diversity in his silhouette. It was finally what Left 4 Dead expected of its special infected and mutations and the powers that followed with that. However, with some degree of change during development for our little guy. The action of the jockey latching onto you as a survivor had a different perspective during playtesting. While typically when you are hit by a pinning special infected, your perspective shifts to the third person to showcase the carnage your survivor is going through, how that particular zombie is killing you, except the jockey for a time, with your player-controlled survivor remaining in first person while being jockeyed, having its claws and legs appear on your screen to really drive home how control over you was being taken. Yet the first-person camera for being jockeyed did not last. This was scrapped, most likely due to the awkwardness of it. It would not be consistent with other special infected that pin. That and the jockey being the only special infected you can resist in any way, shape, or form meant you had these particular visual indicators of where he was wanting to take you and where you were being leaned towards, so you could tilt in the opposite direction to resist his ability, albeit slightly, but it's something. Doing this in first person would have been much more irritating and not in an entertaining way, maybe even nauseating. Not to mention that the jockey also had the ability to just hop off survivor whenever it wishes instead of until they were downed or the jockey was shoved off of them. In Versus, this would have been yet another broken ability, and honestly, weird that they tried to attempt this considering they tried the same thing with the Hunter and Smoker during the betas of Left 4 Dead before and saw it was busted there too. But I guess you never know something's broken until you try it out, right? Its rabid cackling was also much more frequent and honestly more horrific, as you can hear here. pulling the survivor much faster with much less resistance, making it much harder to deal with. Its original movement was also less of the running forward, kind of leaning forward in a hunchback animation than its final creation. The devs really wanted to lean towards its animal-like inspirations, that it apparently ran much more like both a lemur running sideways and a hyena in a four-legged galloping motion.
These fit with his maniacal laughter, but again, needed to be more aggressive. Such movements also would have caused problems maneuvering the character and reading its intentions in-game, especially in versus mode. They also seemed too much of a mutation from the character's original human state.
It was just less aggressive looking and more comical than anything. I mean, have you seen Crab Jockey? And the fact that these movements thing between him and jumping, it made his actions harder to read for survivors in moment-to-moment gameplay. Since his current run is so reserved with his limbs kind of being retracted into his body that compared to when he jumps, letting all his limbs kind of spring out. So you see the difference there? If he was kind of like running on all fours, it would be harder to tell when he's jumping, and it's just helping the player more than anything. There were also elements to its attack methods that were altered or reverted during development. The Jockey originally had a more arm-extensive animation that it used when pouncing at survivors, seen here, probably having been reduced in its overall frame to make it less easier to shoot with a smaller hitbox. This may explain why the Jockey's hitbox for riding a survivor has been bullshit. The game accounts for the model size getting resized according to the survivor size. His hitboxes don't. Combine that with delay between the animation and the hitboxes and you get jank. Instead of having the Jockey raise its hands above its head while pouncing. During development, there was also the horrible mechanic that if you shot the body of a survivor that was being jockeyed, they would be dealt friendly fire. This was obviously omitted because most of the time you can't help but shoot a survivor in the panic state of Left 4 Dead's gameplay. I'm glad there was no friendly fire when it came to jockeys. The Jockey also had scaling pounce damage, much like the Hunter's Leap, depending on how high you hit a survivor from. But having two special infected having the capability to do large amounts of initial damage was probably way too broken. At least with the Hunter, there is some finesse and skill expression to pounce damage, but with the Jockey, it's more just falling onto a survivor from high places more so than not. You don't even have to use your ability, it can just auto latch on, especially since the Jockey requires no wind up to its attack like the Hunter. If there was one thing about the Jockey though, they really had a shit ton of bugs attached to him, being the bane of many players' existence and also having one bug where a simple shove or infected scratch could insta-kill him that somehow remained in the game for close to 11 years on PC. With the core cast of new Special Infected, there were also changes to previous specials and additions of Uncommon Infected into the fray. So let's go over those previous specials and anything that was scrapped, cut, or retooled about them in their migration to the Land of Two. While the Witch did see her inclusion of the day-walking wandering variant, not really anything about her shift to the sequel was held back. Likewise with her jock boyfriend the Tank, although it's neat to note that in censored regions like Germany and Australia where animations of infected directly on fire were removed due to violence displays, except for the Tank. He was omitted, probably for two reasons. One, for it not being human-like in appearance, so that it avoided the violence towards humans censoring guidelines, and two, that the Tank being on fire is a crucial aspect of the game. Having a visual depiction of him being set aflame is kinda necessary for, fighting against the Tank in each game, so it was kept in. The Hunter was also unchanged from what we saw at launch, minus the fact that before the passing update, his initial pounce damage acted in line with how the Jockey's grab worked. What that means is that the Hunter didn't need to leap and could simply just fall straight down off of high places and land on a survivor to both pounce them and deal up to 25 pounce damage at once, negating his trademark sound and being a silent drop. The Smoker had no alterations during the change, but I just wanted to bring up something I missed in the first video. Here is some concept art of him. While some look like rejected offers for Last of Us clickers, A Quiet Place Death Angels, Dying Light Volatiles, and miscellaneous Resident Evil beasts, I just can't help but notice that 2 of his solo arts really focused on a particular part of the smoker's anatomy. Like, dang, I heard smoking stunts your growth.
Hey homie, I can see your doodle. Shut up, Flanders.
Really focused on them tentacles, but dang dude, can you imagine if we had Smoker Dong just barely plopping around? The great sequel, Migration, saw the Boomer finding love in his Boomette. As stated with the Spitter, the Boomer may have not found his female counterpart if it had not been for the fat version of our toxic gal, the Spitter's concept art. Although the Boomette's concept art is slightly different, as she was originally going to have way more pronounced eyeballs just kind of poking out, and she would have had the Harley Davidson Motorcycles logo on her shirt. For obvious reasons, this was cut either due to Harley Davidson flat out rejecting that being included in the game, or Valve simply avoiding a lawsuit from the major motorcycle company. They don't want to insinuate that all their biker chicks look like that.
Fat bottom girls, you make the rockin' world go round. I'm different, yeah, I'm different. I'm different.
Now, there are the uncommon infected that have unique attributes dependent on their clothing and environment to spice up the gameplay. Before the release of the passing campaign, the fallen survivor was doomed to be stuck in limbo, only accessible through the developer console. Playtesting showed that his mechanics proved to be way too janky and explosive for players. Not purely for the fact that he ran away from the survivors when harmed, but because he had prior features that were deleted once the first DLC came roaring by. His mere presence made everything way too hectic and unpredictable, and not in a fun way. Since the lore behind him is that he was a former doomsday prepper, his litany of supplies on him would be active at all times on his chest, meaning if you killed him with a bullet to his torso, the Molotov on his vest would immediately ignite and even summon a horde. This was cause of great concern, as a common being shot caused a big radius of fire on the spot that could have been instant doom for players, especially on higher difficulties. Fire does a lot of damage. This could also have been a pain in the ass on versus, as an unopportuned fallen survivor being nearby could have you easily caught off guard and on fire as an infected without you even knowing it before it's too late. You would have to keep track of the commons that are near you. On top of that, a game-breaking bug could occur when he dropped what was an invisible item on the ground when dead. If you picked this up, your primary weapon would basically be deleted and the icon for it in your inventory replaced with a miscellaneous throwable or healing item, but you could not use them, effectively forcing you to only use your secondary weapon. Hell, sometimes killing the fallen survivor would just flat out crash your game. Now, it's possible that he was planned to be included in the Swamp Fever campaign, as he is seen right here running towards the plantation house in the opening cinematic, but due to his laundry list of issues, he had to be cut. But I think it's just to add more variety in the commons in the opening cinematic. Another similar blunder Easter egg can be noted in the same intro cinematic, where a riot cop infected is seen taking Ellis's gun away from him in the elevator to the Dead Center finale. Probably just to showcase more uncommons in the intro, since the Parish doesn't pop up enough with the uncommons, and that this also shows the Dead Center map at night. Since there was the whole concept of they were doing campaigns at day and night instead of just dusk, dawn, and night that were introduced for Left 4 Dead 2, it's possible Dead Center may have originally been conceived as a night map. But this is probably not it, just reading into it too much, and this was probably just made dark for entertainment purposes to make it more spooky. Also, another small Easter egg in the fact that the cop is able to yoink Ellis's gun before he gets in the elevator. This may be a nod to the scrapped mechanic from the Left 4 Dead Alpha days, where the devs debated on if a survivor would be able to drop their main weapon due to being pinned. Now, the Mudman, Clown, Seed Agent, and the Riot Cop are all largely unchanged changed throughout their whole concept phase. Unless you were in Germany and Australia, where the riot cop just plain was not a part of the game. He just popped out of existence for years due to censorship regulations mandating that violence against law enforcement officials was prohibited, even though they actually were not police, but just run-of-the-mill rent-a-cops. The worker Uncommon Infected is also fun to note because he is the only Uncommon Infected that has no unique dialogue or voice lines from the survivors directed towards it. Why this construction worker isn't specifically noted by Coach Ellis, Rochelle, or Nick is unknown. Maybe Valve forgot to get some recorded lines for him, or maybe mentioning the thing was just cut early on. Maybe Valve figured that the survivors wouldn't take notice of their earmuffs and connect the dots that pipe bombs and unintentionally bile bombs did not distract them, so it made it more of a surprise for players that would not know that the pipe bomb could not be affecting them. But that's it for the infected included or revised up to release. But what about those that shared the same fate as Left 4 Dead 1's Screamer that had been left behind during the concept and development phases? The tank has held a solitary title in all of Left 4 Dead's history as its only boss infected, being the meaty champion of the Green Flu. But for a short time, Valve batted around the idea of an alternate boss infected being available to spawn in the same manner as the tank, known famously as the Meatwall. Not much is known behind the behemoth except for his concept art where he has this sheer girth and the fact that two common infected are seemingly either fused into his arms or are constantly being held by him like ragdolls. Maybe he had the option to pick up common infected lying around nearby or who are walking by and just yeet them like a tank boulder. Who knows? What a new boss infected of this stature could do that the tank couldn't already is up to interpretation. Probably a slower, bulkier, and more resilient variant of the tank. But working around two bosses that would have to determine who would take precedence in being spawned in, and making a boss infected that was not rapidly pursuing the survivors because that thing has got to be slow as hell. That would be terrifying if it had a 28 days later pace, but it probably did not fit the dynamic that Valve was going for, so the wall of meat was torn down and scrapped for chunky parts. The Spitter was supposedly a completely different person before we knew her, in regards to gender, build, and even the kind of gross bile assortment of things gathered in their stomach and profused out the mouth, channeling her inner Pied Piper as the Ratman. Working fundamentally the same as her, but instead of highly corrosive stomach acid, it was basically the rat summoning power from Dishonored, maybe having had its rats act like the acid and dealing residual damage to any survivor that was within their radius, but maybe even further, as if this swarm of rats would slowly follow nearby survivors until eventually fading away, like a movable acid puddle. The devs referred to these rodents as both vermin and verminades. Kind of making me think of Vermintide there. However, just like the Hell Hog that we have mentioned multiple times, having infected animals was just not something that would stick for the Green Flu virus.
Fuck yeah!
Absolutely favorite this.
Valve felt like it just had to be with humans, sticking only to Homo sapiens and leaving these concepts on the drawing board permanently. Now the Spitter has yet another lasting legacy with a little bit of Boomer in between, as the only really scrapped special infected that made it to the in-game gameplay concept phase was a fella by the name of the Leaker. Chet Falasek has said in interviews and himself that they had programmed a special infected that would act as pretty much an infected landmine, similar to the Boomer, maybe even reconstituting how the Boomer's explosion used to do damage. It would spew goo and choose locations in which to plant itself. Once survivors drew near it, it would explode, causing large damage. But as with all special infected, he would have had audible music cues that gave away his intentions, being easily avoidable in situations or attempting to block pathways only to be easily shot. I could possibly have seen this as a non-playable special infected, much like the Witch just spawning in the map, but definitely not being a useful or even entertaining or fun special infected to play as in versus. Having to panic spawn in and hope the survivors draw close enough, just that ain't it. And yet it would be plagued with the same problems of unavoidable explosion damage like the boomer during testing for Left 4 Dead 1. Turtle Rock may have reused some of this idea when they were making their ridden called the Sleeper, where it plants itself somewhere in the map and then automatically pins anyone that draws near. So basically replace the boomer explosion with the hunter pounce. But you know what? Fuck that mechanic, by the way. I hated that thing. While the leaker was explored and even playtested early on, there was never a model or concept art of the creature made. They figured it wasn't worth making anything art-wise or design-wise if they figured out that the special wasn't fun or going to be moving forward into the game. I had almost forgotten to include more scrapped infected. For years, there was a design that people assumed would have been its own special infected, dubbed by the community as Claws. But in recent years, Peter Koenig has come out with his concept art and stating that this design was one of many concepts that didn't get far, if at all, for the Charger, listing the Claws design as a nonsensical one for the Charger since its main character feature, its physical trait, was longer fingers, something the Charger would have no relation with or need to mutate its body into to carry out its attack method. It needs a big strong arm, not little lanky fingers. Leave that to the witch. So that was the many occlusions of infected big and small, and survivors large and tall. But what about the world in which they will roam in, to slaughter and maim within? Unlike Left 4 Dead 1, where entire campaigns were omitted or went through rigorous changes up to release, the 5 campaigns of Left 4 Dead were relatively built solid since their conception, except for a little bit of seasoning here and there, or one that we'll get into in a bit. Dead Center, for one, did not see a lot of difference, ignoring the riot cop in the opening cinematic as definitive proof that he was conceived for the campaign, which was never confirmed. The only real omission for Dead Center and change was with the gun-toting store owner, Whitaker. He now just waits patiently for you to Uber Eats him the conveniently only item left in the market, being cola, so he could shoot the truck with a rocket to blow it up. It was originally to be that he would have actually helped the foursome from his perch shooting the infected with some kind of assault rifle or sniper, kind of as a temporary 5th survivor. This idea was eventually carried over to the passing, where the 3 OG survivors would provide covering fire to the second group at the bridge as they gathered gas cans for the generator. It makes more sense in the context of the passing to have support over the generator while they bring in gas cans, versus a rectangular map in 3 separate layers with a closed off building having one guy picking off infected the whole time. While it would have been cool to have Whitaker do all these, it just never happened. The proof is in the pudding too, because there are sound files in the game that remain from Whitaker's shooting days.
Climb that, you green-skinned son of a bitch!
Dark Carnival mostly had different spawns for tier 2 weapons here and there, from spawns on chapter 1 all over the map to an extra 3rd tier 2 weapon in the room right before the drop off to the carousel event. It's when we get to the entertainment sections of the park that things start to show some difference from conception. The roller coaster section of the carnival had originally been intended to have a survival map counterpart on release, as proven through exploits where players reached the chapter that it's housed within through regular survival chapters if you do the grenade launcher jump glitch. Once reaching there and turning on the roller coaster, specific spawns for supplies along the coaster that are never there in campaign or versus proves this point. While it is a neat idea to use the coaster as a survival map, the limited amount of survival maps in the game and the coaster's crescendo designed pathing and multiple high points would not really fit for what survival is going for. Long-term holdouts in a condensed part of a map, especially since half of the coaster is cut off once you drop down at that one specific point. Of course, that could have been rectified by putting a ladder on the coaster or simply being able to walk back up it, but it still would just not have been entertaining to try and achieve decent times on, so it was cut. The finale of the concert would remain its loud, bombastic, rock-hard, but largely bland map style till execution, except for how you escaped the carnival originally. Instead of using the pyrotechnics to signal a chopper to come and get you, you would have instead taken a train to get away. In an interview that NF had with the Valve level designers, they stated this: "The original escape vehicle for Dark Carnival was a train. There's even some voice lines for a train escape in the game's files, but it was later changed to a bus and eventually to a helicopter, because the devs felt the layout didn't make much sense for the train or bus. This would make more logistical sense and give more weight to the survivors starting Swamp Fever in the middle of a wrecked train car instead of ending up in one with the crashed helicopter just kinda haphazardly thrown behind it, especially since that helicopter is just the Channel 5 news helicopter from No Mercy. The idea of a train at the Dark Carnival finale would return in the fan-made custom campaign Dark Carnival Remix, where following one on the tracks from the original Chapter 3 would be a part of the crescendo event leading to the finale." Furthermore, on the Left 4 Dead 2 Reddit, user L4D2NF hosted a Q&A with some devs leading up to the release of Dark Carnival Remix to get some ideas to make the campaign more like it was conceptualized and to expand on the gameplay and styles for this fan-made campaign. Two Valve devs came out to say this: "The original finale was supposed to be a train. You could see you arrive in a train boxcar at the beginning of Swamp Fever, but I think we felt it didn't feel like it really tied into the carnival type setting, and Valve Dev 2 wanted to do the concert. If I remember correctly, there was supposed to be a guy in the concert area who was going to help you with the stage lights and sound. He was going to be up in the audience area at the back, and you would have to ask him to be your tech crew. It was later changed to turn it on yourselves." The second dev would expand on this statement: "The stage finale originally had you move about the stadium to switch banks in the bleachers, but we cut it back to just defending the stage. I wanted to keep the players moving rather than sticking to the stage. I eventually pulled this off by placing items around the arena. This might have been when the tech guy was written in, but I'm not sure. The train departure was cut in favor of the helicopter rescue from the stadium. As far as I can remember, the train rescue was going to involve a train showing up behind a fence and the team jumping on when it arrived. It was tougher spatially to pull this off from the stage because we wanted to keep the experience more contained. Much easier to make a chopper fly in over the walls that kept you inside the stadium." So basically what they're saying is, instead of finagling with a random tech guy that stayed behind from the concert, having the survivors do everything themselves made it more dynamic and forced more movement while making the world feel more apocalyptic, like there is less people. And to make the vehicle come to you instead of figuring out how to make a train that goes out into the bayous of Louisiana all the way from a carnival makes sense. Connecting to the swamp though, the murky depths of the campaign stayed pretty stagnant from little to no change. The cinematic trailer has people always mentioning the fallen survivors' inclusion and the turret being on the first floor instead of the second, but these are more than likely just changes to make the split-second action shots that show up for like less than 2 seconds more interesting and diverse. But what was an idea for the middle child of a campaign was the fact that some of the wooden walkways that you have to go across could break randomly, causing you to fall to the shallow water and land below, probably playing into the RNG-driven director changing the map on each playthrough. But the unpredictability of rickety planks snapping without knowing which could do so would have made it so much more irritating. The only notes of this idea comes from a small snippet from the official Xbox magazine back in August of 2009, just a few months before Left 4 Dead 2's release. Thank God that that didn't make it through because just the slow movement in water makes a lot of people hate Swamp Fever for that reason. So if you were to make it to where the only bridges could snap and make you fall down, that would have sealed the deal for making it one of the least favorite campaigns for a lot of people. Hard Rain saw some ease in its beginning, where weapons would originally not spawn in the burger tank, but instead much later in the chapter, making it more difficult for players to get through the map, in contrast to Dead Center's first chapter, where you only had secondary weapons for the first half until you got through the elevator. But it makes sense there because the close spaces of the hotel's hallways made it manageable to work with those weapons, versus Hard Rain's open streets and rooftops where infected can come from any angle. Since the campaign itself is one that you do make a return visit through each part of the map, there was an idea to literally light your way back home. According to Chet Falasek at Eurogamer Expo London, there was a mechanic of flipping on lights in buildings and streets on the way to the gas station to brighten your return visit through the torrential and dark rain so it may be more illuminated. Honestly though, it wasn't really necessary and would largely just be so inconsequential to put the time and effort into, especially with the flow of the campaign, that it was scrapped. There was no point in just flipping on lights, so they just made it mandatory for the lights to be on. Other scrapped mechanics for Hard Rain would have entailed the survivors using flares to signal Virgil to return to pick them up from the dock. This was changed to something more in line with how Left 4 Dead survivors do things by turning on the burger tank sign, just doing something so outlandish instead of something so simple. While the flares were removed, it's most likely a playful reference when you start up the Hard Rain campaign, where the survivors bicker with each other over who forgot the flares in the gun bag.
What are we supposed to signal him with?
Oh, there's flares in the gun bag.
What gun bag? Oh, fuck. Tell me we didn't forget the guns.
The gas station's right across the street. Let's just get the gas and then we'll figure out how to signal Virgil.
Now, the common infected populating the areas of Hard Rain also had different visuals to them exclusive to the campaign to show how saturated from the heavy rain the infected were, but it was scrapped due to the vapid nature of how the maps change on your return visit. It would not make sense for the infected to be soaking wet when you first go through parts of the map. These renditions of the commons can be easily reinstated through workshop mods. Leaving the rain behind, the Parish, the basically center stage of levels for Left 4 Dead 2 in New Orleans, saw a decent amount of revisions. Most notably were that Chapter 1 and 2 would have all just been one very long chapter from the dock all the way till after the bus station crescendo event. Devs found it to be a bit too long for most players. This may be why the area right after the park has an abundance of medkits and healing items, a compensation for that long road. You can still access this version of the map by typing map C5M1_waterfront_SNDscape in the console commands. Another thing of note in regards to the crescendo event were changes to the beginning, middle, and end of it. The original CETA truck in which you entered to start was going to just be a regular military tent with decontamination showers sprinkling survivors before going in and out. The same showers can be seen if you clip through the map, being active in the bus station when the alarm has been turned off. To add more flavor to this being a quarantine zone, they were rallying people in here and trying to stop the infection, so they had to sanitize. Also of note is that the alarm sounded like it was straight out of Kill Bill. I mean, listen to this.
Oh, now the Charger's beating on me. Alright.
Way more jarring and honestly grating to hear and deal with, adding more stress and pressure. Sure, it's a horror game and it's hectic. You can think that would add a little spice to the souffle of the undead, but it would become annoying to deal with, especially on repeat playthroughs where you would probably consistently die at higher difficulties. So it was changed to a lower toned repeating sound so that the high-pitched attacks of the infected would be more discernible. The Parish also had a different music theme for when hordes were summoned by the AI director. What we currently have sounds like this. an arrangement of a variety of instruments popular in New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz music, so it makes sense. But originally, the score would have sounded more southern encompassing, to say the least. What does that mean? Here, give it a listen. Whether or not that would have been better or worse, I'll leave that up to you. Now, the famous park in which you have 3 options to pick a path between was originally devised as a rather elaborate, procedurally generated maze for players to navigate. But the advent of trying to figure your way through a labyrinth in the environment of Left 4 Dead 2's playstyle just made it more frustrating for players where resources and health are limited, and where the AI director would punish you for dawdling in a specific area for too long. If you got lost in the maze, the AI director would be like, they're just screwing around, let's throw some zombies their way.
Playtesters found the path confusing. When we removed the dynamic objects that forced survivors to go in certain directions, we found that having all paths open led to a better experience. Players still spend a lot of time in the park, but they could choose to go different ways every time they played the level.
But the idea of a procedurally generated area would be slightly tweaked and then used for the campaign version of the cemetery later on in the campaign, where 4 different possible pathways exist for the dead area.
Something that was always sad for us to watch in Left 4 Dead was that players would always choose an optimized path through a level once they played the map a couple times. So one thing we wanted to add in Left 4 Dead 2 was the ability for the AI director to change the path of the survivors through a level, so they have to take a different path each time.
The final stretch of the series, being the Memorial Bridge, would have been a bit different as well. Instead of calling the military for pickup, you would instead be in contact with someone named Lieutenant Maverick, who would be making emergency repairs on the rescue chopper you would be going to, giving the survivors a 15-minute timer on the screen that needs to be beat, lest they be left for dead.
Rescue 7, what is your repair status? Over. Repair ETA is 10 minutes, over. Copy that. All lambs extracted. Last buzzard starts run in 15 minutes. Copy that. Over.
But a timer of that length was plenty of time, and adding a timer to a crescendo event where you're already going to be rushing didn't fit with what they were doing. Timers are largely reserved to survival and survival type finales, even though you can't see them. The timer would also have been less strenuous, as the devs stated that the original bridge finale would have had no vehicles whatsoever dotting the concrete mass. Just a long, boring stretch of running across the bridge with some holes and some tiered levels that you went up and down between. Having cars populate the bridge made it feel like more people were attempting to evacuate and were overwhelmed. Kind of like that Walking Dead scene with Rick going towards Atlanta and seeing all the cars on the other side of the highway. It gives that visual storytelling that Left 4 Dead has always been exceptional at. So we got the people, the zombies, and the world they are in. But what about what those people are wielding to kill the infected, to survive, and to help them give an edge to survive? Well, weapons and supplies saw some minor changes here and there. But before that, what is most fascinating were some cut melee weapons, being the riot shield and the didgeridoo. Shield being fully completed down to its motions and texture, but still omitted and contained purely in console commands and usable in expanded community mods. Most likely axed, since the police baton was already in game and much less disruptive to a survivor's vision compared to the riot shield, especially since the stick is an actual melee weapon while the shield is, well, a shield. Less flashy in execution, being a blunt rectangle that could only do so much, begging the questions of why survivors didn't just carry both the shield and the stick. But then we're getting into the question of gameplay versus logistics. Ultimately, the shield makes less sense for a fun melee weapon that feels good to hit zombies with. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have
Didgeridoo. That seems very noisy. crazy and expensive for a souvenir.
Barebones modeling of a didgeridoo, a wind instrument made by northern Aborigines in Australia over 1,000 years ago, exists in the game, but nothing else came of it as it was probably dropped early on in its own creation. My theory as to why this even exists in the first place is that since Australia faced censorship, that Valve was whipping up an exclusive melee weapon to Aussie gamers to compensate the lack of blood and violence, since instruments like that would have no business being plentiful in the American South, although if you think about it, katanas and cricket bats are too, but chalk those up to weebs and Shaun of the Dead references respectively. The wooden music device was probably axed in favor of importing Counter-Strike weapons instead to save on limited dev time since the game had less than a year in the oven. Melees weren't the only weapons going to the scrapyard though. Files indicate that both a flare gun and a law rocket launcher were both to be usable by the survivors, but I would say that these both serve as titles used for weapons intended to not be usable by players, but by NPCs and map mechanics, with the flare being a part of the scrap version of Hard Rain's finale, and the rocket launcher being what Whitaker uses to clear the way in Dead Center. Plus, we have the grenade launcher as a special weapon, so it would be a bit redundant to include another long-range explosive gun. Early development also saw concept sketches with our boy Coach wielding a compound bow. Nothing else really came of that, with nothing in developer commentary or files to hint at that weapon's inclusion. My guess would be that a bow and arrow weapon wouldn't serve well in the environment of Left 4 Dead as it would in other games. The weapon is more of a stealthy, slow-loading, and singular target-focused weapon. None of these fit with the Horde shooter, where infected automatically already know where you are at most times anyways, especially special infected. They auto-lock onto you. But if you want a bow and arrow experience of shooting once and then taking forever to make the next shot, just go pick the op. But what about weapons in the final release? And how were they during testing, and how could they have been? For the firearms that carried over from 1 to 2, not much really changed about them. Early test builds just had the same look, feel, sound, and damage output as they were in Left 4 Dead 1. The hunting rifle, combat shotgun, pump shotgun, Uzi, and M16 followed this. For the new assortment, things had some tweaks. The AK-47 originally had a faster fire rate. The Scar combat rifle was fully automatic in a 50-round mag instead of the 3-round bursts in a 60-round mag we got today. The silenced SMG and its strap have jiggle physics that were eventually restored in the Last End update. The Desert Eagle Magnum was originally going to be referred to as the Desert Cobra. Signage at Whitaker's gun shop reflects this snaky originality, probably choosing to call it the Desert Eagle to keep it more patriotic since this is set in the US. While our guns weren't changed all that much, the melee weapons are where we got the change sauce.
Ask me a question. I dare you.
The basically favorite melee weapon of the dev team, the fire axe, had 2 major cuts. Pun intended. One was a downward swing animation that it originally had. That was cut because, well, we've played with the pitchfork since the Last Stand update. We've had 5 years to goof with that. It uses a vertical swing, and a vertical swing is wildly less effective compared to a horizontal one when dealing with the infected, especially in large numbers. You just have a wider net in which to cut them. The fire axe also apparently had the ability to decapitate the witch if you hit it just right, like crowning her but with more headway. Much like the curb stomp mechanic I'll be discussing in a bit, being able to kill the witch in this manner required less finesse than the crowning kind of mechanic. It also probably was cut to reduce dev time in modeling a headless witch, since in most, if not all cases of Left 4 Dead 2 at launch, special infected never have their models modified by damage in any way minus some blood from bullets. The crowbar was apparently going to have a faster swing, similar to the rates of the machete and police baton, but that never came to be. The GameStop pre-order of the baseball bat was intended to be made of metal instead of wood, with some sound effects still there in old trailers. It and the cricket bat also retained the same wonky downward animations the axe had. Same reason on why those were cut, and the same with the frying pan. There was a lot of downward animations, and Valve figured out people didn't really like that. Here's a hint on the Last Stand stuff. Just make the pitchfork not do that anymore.
She loves it. She's going for it.
Whoa! What the hell are you doing? You can't throw art in the trash.
Oh, that wasn't art, it was garbage.
Ha! Got him!
The Bile Bomb was originally going to be a neutral faction grenade. What does that mean? Well, if you were to hit a fellow survivor with your Bile Bomb, they would be biled as well. This was most likely changed to both alleviate frustrations of accidentally hitting teammates in the fast-paced environment of Left 4 Dead, and to nip that griefing in the bud. It is just common sense with how online games are that people are going to screw with you. Friendly fire bile bombs would have been the bane of many random online gaming experiences. Lord knows I would be the one Nickelodeon sliming my friends at any given opportunity every time I got that bile bomb, so I am glad they did not incorporate it.
Jesus! Boomer files that takes!
I do.
So retarded!
Back to melee weapons just one last time before we go into a mystery grab bag of Left 4 Dead 2 changes that never made it to launch. There was also going to be the ability to dual wield melee weapons. Yeah, that's right. You could like have a machete in one hand and a katana in the other, but however, it proved to be too finicky to work with. They had a few play tests with it and figured out it just wasn't worth it. Much like after Halo 2 and 3, the devs didn't really see a point in dual wielding weapons when one got the job done with less visual clutter on screen. Yeah, it looks cool, but the luster would run off pretty quickly. Melee weapons also were going to be like Dead Rising, where they would eventually break after enough use. Taking a breath of the wild, Valve decided it just wasn't fun to manage melee weapons in this way. Where guns, you could see how much ammo you had left, so you could at least replenish what you had or get a new gun. Melee weapons breaking relied on sound alone in the midst of all the other sounds going on that you would have to micromanage. It would have just been annoying. You could play mods to bring this mechanic back, and some people may believe this is superior, but it would not have been good in the environment of Left 4 Dead. I know I've said that chain of words a lot, but that is the case. But what some people believe are good can go where Uncle Eddie lets out his shitter.
Shitter was full!
Now, to the miscellaneous section of the video, there were plans and even coding implemented into the launch version of the game that saw the survivors stomping the heads of infected to finish them off. Leftover files can be easily accessed to achieve this through SV cheats. If you were to shove in a lone infected, you would insta-kill them American History X style. This supposed curb stomp could even be capable of killing the witch with a single Grand Theft Auto Goomba stomp. While the idea of a whole different third-person animation, yes, it would put you in a third-person animation of killing the infected sounds and may even look cool, it would be way too disruptive to the flow of the game. Suddenly stopping on a dime to Gallagher a zombie's head open with your foot would not work. It would leave you wide open to being hit by all sorts of threats in the midst of this sequence. You would be locked into that animation. Not only that, but it's very easy to dramatize how annoying and clunky the execution would be. Shoving a singular infected would trigger the animation that could easily and accidentally screw you over. Here's an example. You're trying to run from a group of infected, or maybe there is a charger or jockey running after you. You try to shove one common away that's ahead of you, only for you to get locked into the stomping sequence and the other infected catching up to you to either pin you down or start wailing on you, especially since it could trigger even if you weren't within distance to hit them. You would basically magnetize to your target, much like a survivor does to a pallet in Dead by Daylight. On the topic of survivors acting somewhat like Dead by Daylight skins, survivors, there's no real difference between characters in that game. Apparently, the idea of crawling on the ground while incapacitated was set to return from the scrapped concept days of Left 4 Dead 1. The same method of accessing the crawling mechanic and the fact that there were 4 unique crawling animations for the 4 new survivors are within the files as well. Redacted like the US government's attempt at the Epstein files, where you can access it all just by easily typing in a few commands. Just like its predecessor, this crawling mechanic was probably scrapped once again to make the dying state more critical and more reliant on teamwork, in order to keep downed people in one place waiting on help, and to also not make it easier for survivors to get themselves out of dangerous situations that either the infected may have put them in or the survivors put themselves in reference to people getting stuck with where they put themselves in, PlayStation has no frickin' games. While it probably did not last long in the development talks and phases, when EA was publishing Left 4 Dead 2 and listing it on their website, some information had come out assuming that the sequel would be coming to the PlayStation 3 console. This was all that ever came of it and was most likely kept to Xbox and PC due to Valve and specifically Gabe Newell's good relationship with Microsoft for many years at that point.
So that's what I get for working at Microsoft.
On the topic of Microsoft, funnily enough, when it came to people digging into websites for any nuggets of information pertaining to Left 4 Dead 2, data miners discovered that there was something labeled as both a Miracle Pack and an Apocalypse Pack. People assumed that these two names were additions of Left 4 Dead 2 that you could get at launch. Hell, it's common practice for games to have multiple different versions at release with different content that you would get. Maybe different skins or something, although that wasn't really commonplace in major gamer releases at the time, not to the capacity that it is today. Regardless, these code names had nothing to do with the game for launch or additions. Chet Falasek came out to say that these files were simply titles for testing code for certification to bring Left 4 Dead to Microsoft and Xbox. It was just a part of the process of bringing the game to a different console. So no, there wasn't going to be DLC depending on the kind of edition you would get, so no coach in a football uniform or Nick in a prison suit as a pre-order bonus. Although we did get a baseball bat if you pre-ordered with GameStop. As kind of lame as the baseball bat was as a pre-order bonus, do you remember that super well animated commercial just to promote that?
Looks like the team is getting together for a little powwow.
Yeah, they're in a real jam here, Skipper.
You said it. Their opponents tonight are a real hungry bunch.
Their intensity is infectious.
Well, it appears the coach has a plan. Here's the pitch. Swung on. Oh, boy.
That's a home run.
Pre-order Left 4 Dead 2 at GameStop and get an exclusive in-game baseball bat. Power to the players. Rated M for mature.
That shit was lit! I will say Back 4 Blood must have done what they love to do and reuse scrapped concepts for Left 4 Dead that should not have been making it to the game, but this time repurposing that incorrect pack idea into additions for Back 4 Blood. And we all know how that went. $100 for the Ultimate Edition. What was I thinking? While there are a few minor things I skimmed over, like how the adrenaline used to look like a bottle of pills but yellow and the defib just being the medkit but with a lightning bolt on it, placeholders aren't really cut content, they're just there temporarily, as is a bunch more that I may have omitted. Left 4 Dead 2 saw quite a lot of differences in the short development span that originally spurred from ideas that Valve and Turtle Rock wanted to implement as DLC for the original Left 4 Dead, going through rigorous testing into what would be fun for the special infected to go as and against, what survivors worked as in appearance, voice, and most importantly, personality-wise. How when it comes to map changes, even if you want new ideas to be reflected on them, need to be shown with some restraint. How different everything could have looked and feeled just from a lot of these differences, and how things go from concept to reality. From 2005 sketches and a litany of different looking zombies zombies to what we have today, and I think what we got in the end turned out to be purely perfect and refined byproducts of the perfect zombie horde shooter experience that has only been solidified in people's minds for a decade and a half now. We might talk trash about it from time to time. Hey, it's still relevant after all this time, and that's not even including all the mods. It's just a good base game, and there was a lot that went into it. So Left 4 Dead 2 would have looked a lot different if they just kept a lot of the designs, and why things had to change so much. That about wraps up this exhaustive look into what Left 4 Dead 2 could have been, and let me just say this was probably the biggest video I've worked on since the entire story of Left 4 Dead 2, I guess. It's funny because the first Left 4 Dead 1 video I did of this nature was shorter, and I was assuming Left 4 Dead 2 wouldn't be as long, but there was a lot more to sink my teeth into. It's kind of like how I did the stories with the I Guess series, but I'm digressing. Thank you so much for watching, and for Jays helping me out in getting some information right, to Walker's Films and Dark Games, aka Duka Gumby, for their incredible animation talents, and so many more animators throughout Left 4 Dead history that I have credited throughout the video. You guys have made what Left 4 Dead is today. If you would like to see the cut content of all of Left 4 Dead's DLCs and content updates from Crash Course, the original Last Stand, The Passing, The Sacrifice, Coldstream, and then the community-made Last Stand update, let me know down below. Were there things I got wrong or did not bring up throughout the video? You know what to do. Go in the comments, complain, or correct me. I would love to see it. I mean, I made a couple of mistakes in the first video. Support the channel and our efforts by donating on my Patreon and becoming a patron to see my videos up to a week early. Do that, or become a YouTube channel member, or donate during my weekly live streams of Left 4 Dead 2 with fans on my second channel, WSG Streams, to have your name featured here. Shout out to all my supporters on this list for keeping me motivated after all these years and keeping me afloat during these economically turbulent times. Then we have our special infected YouTube memberships. You could become a member today, just like Generally Soldier, Jervis Wilson, Navukal, Sean Norris, yes_daddy_808. I put underscore there because I did not want to say your name in succession very quickly, and Wendell from BBB. And we just got a few common infected live stream donators in Nestamac, and Mal. And a big thank you to you for watching my stupid little videos for almost 10 years now. Oh, that's right. Coming this May will be the 10th anniversary of Wow Such Gaming, of this channel beginning May 3rd, 2016. Man, time sure does fly talking about Left 4 Dead, zombies, post-apocalypses, talking about how stupid people are, and more. It has been a hell of a journey from doing all of this in a little studio at my radio station and at my mom's house to an apartment with my best friend.
You don't want to play an Elder Scrolls game? Come on, man.
No, I don't. Not this one.
To every device.
Why not?
It's on phone.
Phones,
no.
PCs.
But you do everything on your phone.
Why would you want to play a game in fucking portrait mode?
On mobile.
Read off on it while you fucking play Elder Scrolls?
To my own home that I was able to get through YouTube and living with my girlfriend and her son. I love them both so much. Anyways, before I start getting all sentimental, thank you again for watching. And until next time, I'm Zackass, aka Wow Such Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, pray harder, and most importantly, stay wow.